Good evening, humble viewer. I am so very pleased that you are able to join us on this stormy night, and for whatever reason you may have found yourself here, please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time of day it is. Now I hope you are nestled snugly in your favorite blanket and are ready to transcend sleeplessness. For tonight, we will not concern ourselves with sudden shocks or moments of overt horror. We will not be startled by lightning or chased through the Arctic ice. Well, not yet. Instead, our journey begins in a much quieter place. It begins with ideas, with ink and paper, with the soft, persistent patter of rain against glass. Before we can understand the creature, we must first understand the mind that conceived him. Before we meet Victor Frankenstein, the pale student of unhallowed arts, we must first meet his creator, a young woman named Mary, who was herself the product of extraordinary and revolutionary minds. Our story begins not with a bolt of lightning, but with a legacy. It is a story of intellectual inheritance, of personal tragedy, and of a world trembling on the cusp of a new age, an age where the old boundaries between science, philosophy, and the supernatural seem to be dissolving like mist on a cool lake. To truly appreciate the birth of Frankenstein, we must first travel back, not to a Gothic laboratory, but to the radical drawing rooms of late 18th century London, to the minds of two of the most formidable thinkers of their time, a man and a woman whose love story and philosophical fervour would set the stage for their daughter to create an immortal monster. We begin with Mary Shelley's parents, William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft. Their influence on their daughter, and by extension on her creation, cannot be overstated. It was the air she breathed, the foundation upon which her intellect was built. To ignore them would be to start a story in its second act, so let us settle in and allow our minds to drift back to this era of profound change. William Godwin was, by all accounts, a man of formidable intellect. Born in 1756, he began his career as a dissenting minister, a path that speaks to a certain seriousness of mind, a tendency toward rigorous examination of morality and society. However, his faith gradually eroded, not through some dramatic crisis, but through the slow, methodical application of reason. He peeled back the layers of doctrine and dogma until he was left with a stark intellectual framework of his own making. He became a leading voice of British radicalism, a philosopher who championed the power of pure reason to perfect humanity. His most famous work, An Inquiry Concerning Political Justice, published in 1793, was a landmark of political philosophy. In it, Godwin argued that humanity was perfectible, that our vices and sufferings were not inherent flaws in our nature, but the direct result of corrupt and restrictive institutions, chief among them being government, law, marriage, and private property. He envisioned a future society where these institutions would wither away, replaced by a harmonious anarchy of individuals guided solely by reason and benevolence. He believed that our minds were, in essence, blank slates, and that through education and the relentless application of logic, we could overcome our passions and prejudices. Imagine this philosophy for a moment. It is one of supreme, almost cold optimism. It places an immense faith in the human intellect. In Godwin's view, a perfectly rational being would always make the morally correct choice. There was no need for coercion, no need for laws, because reason, universally applied, would lead all people to the same virtuous conclusions. He was, in a sense, a utopian thinker, but his utopia was not one of sensual pleasure or spiritual ecstasy. It was a utopia of the mind, a tranquil society of philosophers. He argued against the institution of marriage, calling it the most odious of all monopolies. He believed that individuals should be free to form and dissolve relationships based on mutual esteem and rational affection, unconstrained by legal bonds. This was not a call for libertinism, but a deeply serious, if impractical, vision of human relationships stripped of all possessiveness and emotional tyranny. This man, William Godwin, was a celebrity of his day. His book was wildly influential, discussed and debated in intellectual circles across Britain. He was seen as a sage, a prophet of a new age of reason. His home became a gathering place for radicals, poets, and free thinkers. He was, by all accounts, a calm, methodical, and somewhat emotionally detached man. His life was one of routine, of study, of quiet contemplation. He was a man who believed that the passions were a storm to be weathered by the steady hand of reason. And it was this man who would fall deeply in love with the one woman in England who could match his intellectual fire, a woman for whom the passions were not a storm to be weathered, but a force to be understood and honestly expressed. This was Mary Wollstonecraft. If Godwin was the apostle of reason, Wollstonecraft was the champion of a rational but deeply felt humanity. Born in 1759, her early life was marked by instability and hardship. She witnessed firsthand the tyranny of a patriarchal society, tending to a mother trapped in an abusive marriage and struggling to carve out an independent existence for herself and her sisters in a world that offered women few such opportunities. She worked as a governess, a schoolmistress, and a translator, all the while honing an intellect and a literary voice that would soon shake the foundations of European society. Her seminal work, published in 1792, just a year before Godwin's Political Justice, was a vindication of the rights of woman. This text is now regarded as one of the foundational documents of modern feminism, but at the time it was a work of shocking radicalism. Wollstonecraft argued, with both passionate eloquence and rigorous logic, that the perceived inferiority of women was not a matter of natural design, but of neglected education. She contended that women, like men, were rational beings, and that society, by denying them access to the same intellectual development, was not only oppressing them, but also holding back the progress of humanity as a whole. She attacked the prevailing notion that women should be educated only to be pleasing to men, to be delicate, ornamental creatures. Such an education, she argued, rendered them in a state of perpetual childhood, unable to stand alone. She called for a national system of education where boys and girls would be taught together, developing their minds and bodies in tandem. She believed that only through such an education could women become true companions to men, rather than mere dependents, and more importantly, become fully realized individuals in their own right. Her vision was one where reason would govern the relationships between the sexes, leading to marriages based on mutual respect, intellectual companionship, and genuine friendship, rather than financial convenience or fleeting passion. Wollstonecraft did not discount emotion, however. Unlike Godwin's more austere philosophy, hers was a call for a synthesis of reason and feeling. She had lived a life of intense emotional experience, including a disastrous love affair in Paris during the height of the French Revolution, which resulted in the birth of her first daughter, Fanny Imlay, and a subsequent period of deep depression. She understood that human beings were not merely thinking machines. She argued that sensibility, the capacity for deep and refined feeling, was essential to a virtuous life, but that it must be guided and tempered by reason. Without reason, sensibility became mere sentimentality. Without sensibility, reason became cold and lifeless. These two titans of radical thought, William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft, began to circle one another in the intellectual orbits of London. They had met once before and had not been impressed. Godwin complained that Wollstonecraft had talked so much during a dinner that he could not get a word in with the other famous guest, Thomas Paine. But when they met again in 1796, something had changed. They found in each other a profound intellectual and emotional connection. Here were two people who had, in their writings, theorized about the ideal form of human relationships, and now they found themselves living it. Their courtship was a thing of letters, of long conversations, of a meeting of minds so profound it became an affair of the heart. Despite his written condemnations of marriage, Godwin found his principles tested by his love for Wollstonecraft. When she became pregnant, they made the decision to marry, a concession to social convention made primarily for the sake of their unborn child. They did so in March of 1797, scandalizing some of their more dogmatic followers who felt Godwin had betrayed his own philosophy. They tried to maintain their independence even in marriage, living in adjoining houses and often communicating by note, preserving a space for their own work and thoughts. It was a brief, unconventional, but deeply happy union. On August 30th, 1797, Mary Wollstonecraft, Godwin gave birth to her second daughter, a girl she and William named Mary. But the birth was fraught with complications. The placenta was not delivered properly, leading to infection. In an era before modern medical hygiene, childbirth was a perilous affair, and what should have been a moment of joy turned into a slow-motion tragedy. For 10 days, Godwin sat by his wife's bedside, a man of reason watching helplessly as the woman he loved, the most brilliant mind he had ever known, was consumed by puerperal fever. On September the 10th, 1797, Mary Wollstonecraft died. She was 38 years old. The infant Mary, who would one day be known as Mary Shelley, thus entered the world through an act of creation that simultaneously caused an act of destruction. Her life began with her mother's death. This single, devastating fact would hang over her entire existence. She was the child of a ghost, the living reminder of a monumental loss. William Godwin, the detached philosopher, was shattered. He wrote to a friend, "I have not the leisure to be miserable. I am a beggar in health and fortune. I have a wife I have just lost who was the sole reliance of my posterity. I have 2 children, one of whom is Fanny, who is a daughter of my wife's. The other is a daughter of my own. These children are the most defenseless creatures in the world." He poured his grief into his work, publishing a candid and heartfelt biography, Memoirs of the Author of A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. In it, he honestly detailed Wollstonecraft's life, including her love affairs and her suicide attempts. His intention was to honor her, to present her as a complex and brilliant human being. But to the conservative society of the time, the book was a scandal. It tarnished Wollstonecraft's reputation for decades, painting her as a promiscuous and unstable woman, and her ideas were dismissed along with her character. This was the world into which the infant Mary was born. A world defined by radical ideas and profound personal grief. She grew up in a house filled with books and intellectuals, but also with the ever-present, silent absence of the mother she never knew. Godwin educated his daughter himself, immersing her in the classics, in literature, in her parents' own revolutionary works. She would sit quietly in his study, reading, listening to the conversations of the great thinkers who came to visit. Men like the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge and the chemist Humphrey Davy. She was not sent to school. Her education, much like her mother had advocated, was one of intellectual immersion. She was known as a quiet, watchful, and intensely imaginative child, often retreating into daydreams. She learned to read by tracing the letters on her mother's tombstone in the St. Pancras Old Churchyard. That somber image, a small girl learning language from a memorial to her dead mother, is a powerful and fitting metaphor for her early life. The household, however, was not a happy one. Godwin, lonely and struggling to raise 2 small children, remarried a widow named Mary Jane Claremont. Mrs. Claremont brought with her 2 children of her own, Charles and Claire. By all accounts, she was not a warm or nurturing stepmother, particularly towards Mary, whom she seemed to view with a certain jealousy as the child of the brilliant and famous first wife. The home became a place of friction and emotional tension. Mary felt herself to be an outsider in her own home, a feeling that would deeply inform the themes of alienation and loneliness in her later work. Her primary emotional connection was with her father, who cherished her intellect, and with the idealized image of the mother she had never met. It was in this environment of intellectual richness and emotional austerity that Mary grew into a young woman. And it was into this environment, in 1812, that a new figure arrived, a whirlwind of passion, poetry, and radical politics. His name was Percy Bysshe Shelley. Shelley was, in many ways, the living embodiment of the ideals that Godwin had written about. He was a fervent atheist, a political radical, and a believer in free love. He was also a brilliant poet, already making a name for himself as one of the leading figures of the second generation of Romantic poets. He had come to Godwin as a disciple, revering the philosopher's work. At the time, Shelley was just 21, but he was already married to a 16-year-old woman named Harriet Westbrook, a union he had entered into more out of a sense of chivalry than deep affection. When Shelley met the 16-year-old Mary Godwin, he was captivated. He saw in her not only a striking physical beauty, with her fair skin, light brown hair, and keen, intelligent eyes, but also the living legacy of the 2 thinkers he most admired. She was the daughter of Godwin and Wollstonecraft, an intellectual princess. And Mary, in turn, was utterly enthralled by Shelley. He was handsome, passionate, and brilliant. a stark contrast to the quiet, somber world of her father's house. He saw her, truly saw her, in a way she had never felt seen before. Their connection was immediate and profound. They began to meet in secret, their favourite meeting place being the St Pancras churchyard by the grave of Mary Wollstonecraft. It was there, in the symbolic presence of her mother, that Mary and Shelley declared their love for one another. It was a romance born of shared ideals, intellectual passion, and the transgressive thrill of defying convention. The situation was, of course, immensely complicated. Shelley was still married. Godwin, the philosopher who had written against the tyranny of marriage, was horrified. He forbade Shelley from visiting the house, not on moral grounds related to his marriage, but because Shelley was an aristocrat with debts, and Godwin saw the potential for financial and social ruin. But the bond between Mary and Shelley was too strong. In July of 1814, just weeks after her 17th birthday, Mary made a choice that would define the rest of her life. She ran away with Percy Shelley. They were accompanied by Mary's stepsister, Claire Clairmont, who, ever the opportunist, decided to join them on their continental adventure. Their elopement was a scandal. Mary had abandoned her father, and Shelley had abandoned his pregnant wife. Godwin refused to speak to them. They were social outcasts, living on borrowed money, traveling through a war-torn France. It was a period of intense emotional turmoil, but also of intellectual flourishing. They read voraciously, they wrote, they discussed philosophy and poetry. Mary was living the kind of life her mother had advocated for, one of intellectual and emotional freedom, but it came at a high price. Their first child, a daughter, was born prematurely in February 1815 and died just a few days later. Mary was plunged into a deep depression, haunted by the loss. She wrote in her journal of a recurring dream that my little baby came to life again, that it had only been cold and that we rubbed it before the fire and it lived. This dream, this desperate fantasy of reanimating a dead child, is a chilling premonition of the story that was yet to come. The themes of her life were already beginning to coalesce: creation and death, responsibility and loss, the desperate desire to reverse the irreversible. The year 1816 arrived. It would prove to be one of the most unusual and pivotal years in modern history. Far away in the Dutch East Indies, a volcano named Mount Tambora had erupted in 1815 with almost unimaginable force. It was the largest volcanic eruption in over 1,000 years, ejecting a colossal amount of ash and sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. This vast plume of aerosols spread around the globe, creating a volcanic winter. The sun was dimmed, global temperatures dropped, and weather patterns were thrown into chaos. The summer of 1816 in Europe was not a summer at all. It was known as the year without a summer. It was a time of cold, grey skies, of incessant, driving rain, and of failed crops that led to famine and social unrest across the continent. It was against this backdrop of meteorological gloom and societal anxiety that our small group of English expatriates decided to spend their summer on the shores of Lake Geneva in Switzerland. The party consisted of Mary, now 18 years old and pregnant again, Percy Shelley, their infant son William, and Mary's stepsister, the ever-present Claire Clairmont. Claire, it turned out, had engineered the trip for her own reasons. She had recently had a brief and tumultuous affair with the most famous and infamous poet in all of Europe, George Gordon, Lord Byron. And Byron, as it happened, had also decided to escape the scandals of his own life in England by renting a grand house on the shores of Lake Geneva, the Villa Diodati. So the two households, that of Shelley and that of Byron, found themselves as neighbours in this strange, sunless summer. Byron's party included his personal physician, a young and ambitious man named John William Polidori. The group was a volatile and brilliant collection of egos and intellects. There was Shelley, the ethereal idealist and radical poet. There was Byron, the dark, brooding and charismatic superstar of Romanticism, a man who cultivated an image of aristocratic dissipation and satanic allure. There was the intelligent and observant Mary. There was the ambitious and often overlooked Polidori, and there was the energetic and often manipulative Claire. Trapped indoors for days on end by the relentless rain and the wet, ungenial summer, they sought ways to amuse themselves. They talked late into the night, Their conversations fueled by wine and intellectual fervor. They discussed poetry, politics, and the latest scientific discoveries. One of the most captivating topics was the principle of life itself. The science of the day was grappling with new and unsettling ideas. The experiments of Luigi Galvani, who had shown that the legs of a dead frog could be made to twitch when stimulated with an electrical current, had given rise to the theory of galvanism. It seemed to suggest that electricity was, in some fundamental way, the spark of life. Scientists and thinkers like Humphrey Davy and Erasmus Darwin, grandfather of Charles, had speculated on the possibility of reanimation and the artificial creation of living matter. These were not just abstract philosophical debates, they felt like tangible possibilities, hovering at the edge of scientific understanding. Could a corpse be reanimated? Could life be assembled from non-living parts and imbued with a vital spark? These were the questions that filled the dark, rainy nights at the Villa Diodati. To pass the time, they also read. One evening, they came upon a collection of German ghost stories, a volume entitled Phantasmagoriana. The tales were filled with spectres, grim prophecies, and unsettling psychological horror. After several nights of reading these chilling stories, Lord Byron issued a challenge. "We will each write a ghost story," he declared. The challenge was accepted. Byron himself quickly dashed off a fragment about a vampire. Shelley began a story based on his early life experiences. Polidori, inspired by Byron's fragment, would later develop it into a short story called The Vampire, a work that would become the prototype for the aristocratic, seductive vampire that we know today, long before Bram Stoker's Dracula. But one member of the party struggled. Mary, the quietest of the group, could not think of a story. Day after day she was asked, "Have you thought of a story?" And day after day she was forced to reply with a mortifying negative. The pressure mounted. She felt a need to prove herself, to show that she was worthy of her extraordinary heritage and her place among these two celebrated poets. She listened intently to their conversations, particularly one between Shelley and Byron about the nature of the principle of life and the possibility of galvanism. She later wrote in her 1831 preface to Frankenstein about the effect these conversations had on her. "Night waned upon this talk," she recalled, "and even the witching hour had gone by before we retired to rest. When I placed my head on my pillow, I did not sleep, nor could I be said to think. My imagination, unbidden, possessed and guided me, gifting the successive images that arose in my mind with a vividness far beyond the usual bounds of reverie. And then, it came. It came not as a structured idea, but as a vision, a waking dream. It is worth hearing in her own words as she described it years later. I saw, with shut eyes but acute mental vision, I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then, on the working of some powerful engine, show signs of life and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. Frightful must it be, for supremely frightful would be the effect of any human endeavor to mock the stupendous mechanism of the creator of the world. His success would terrify the artist. He would rush away from his odious handiwork, horror-stricken. He would hope that, left to itself, the slight spark of life which he had communicated would fade, that this thing, which had received such imperfect animation, would subside into dead matter, and he might sleep in the belief that the silence of the grave would quench forever the transient existence of the hideous corpse which he had looked upon as the cradle of life. He sleeps, but he is awakened. He opens his eyes. Behold, the horrid thing stands at his bedside, opening his curtains and looking on him with yellow, watery, but speculative eyes. This was it. This was the core of her story. The terror of the vision was visceral. I opened mine in terror, she wrote. The idea so possessed my mind that a thrill of fear ran through me. I could not so easily get rid of my hideous phantom. It still haunted me. But in that terror, she found her inspiration. She realized that what had terrified her would also terrify others. She had found her story. The next morning, she announced that she had thought of a story. She began to write, intending it to be a short tale, just a few pages to fulfill her part of the bargain. She started with the scene that had appeared to her in her dream. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. But as she wrote, the story began to grow. It was Percy Shelley who recognized its potential. He encouraged her to expand it, to develop the characters and the philosophical underpinnings. The short ghost story began to transform into something much larger, much more ambitious. It became a novel. The rest of their time in Switzerland was spent writing, boating on the lake during the rare moments of sunshine, and continuing their intellectual life together. But the seeds of tragedy that always seemed to follow the Shelleys were sown there as well. Mary's stepsister, Claire, had succeeded in her affair with Byron, and she was now pregnant with his child, a daughter she would name Allegra. Byron, however, was already growing tired of her, a situation that would lead to years of conflict and heartache. They returned to England in the autumn of 1816. The year of gloom was not yet finished with its share of sorrow for Mary. In October, her half-sister, Fanny Imlay, the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft from her earlier affair, committed suicide. Then, in December, Percy Shelley's abandoned wife, Harriet, drowned herself in the Serpentine River in London. She was pregnant with her third child. This series of deaths was devastating, but Harriet's passing, grim as it was, removed the legal obstacle to Mary and Shelley's union. They were married at the end of December 1816, a move calculated to help them gain custody of Shelley's children with Harriet, a battle they would ultimately lose. It was in this crucible of grief, marriage, and ongoing literary creation that Mary Shelley completed her novel. She wrote the bulk of it in 1817 in a small house in Marlow, surrounded by her husband, her own child, and the ghosts of all those she had lost. The story that had begun as a waking dream in a Swiss villa became a profound and complex exploration of the themes that had dominated her young life. The awesome and terrifying power of creation, the responsibility of a creator for their creation, the devastating consequences of abandonment and loneliness, the nature of monstrosity, and the desperate human need for companionship and love. She poured into it the philosophical legacy of her father, with his faith in reason and his critique of social institutions. She infused it with the spirit of her mother, with her belief in a balanced humanity of reason and feeling, and her understanding of how a neglected education can shape a being. She filled its pages with the scientific anxieties and romantic passions of her own era, with the sublime beauty of the natural world she had witnessed with Shelley, and with the deep personal sorrow of a young woman who had been shaped by death from the moment of her own birth. The novel, titled Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, was completed. The subtitle is crucial. Prometheus, in Greek mythology, was the titan who created humanity from clay and then defied the gods by stealing fire for them. For his transgression, he was punished with eternal torment. Victor Frankenstein is Mary's modern Prometheus. He creates life, not from clay, but from the grim materials of the dissecting room. He harnesses a power he does not understand, the fire of life itself, and for his hubris, he and everyone he loves are subjected to a torment that only ends in death. The book was published anonymously in 1818. Mary was just 20 years old. Initial reviews were mixed. Many critics were shocked by its gruesome subject matter and what they perceived as its atheistic and immoral message. But the public was fascinated. The story was powerful, original, and deeply unsettling. It tapped into a vein of cultural anxiety about scientific progress and the limits of human ambition. No one suspected that its author was a young woman. Most assumed it was written by Percy Shelley, whose preface introduced the first edition. But slowly, the truth emerged. The quiet girl from the house of William Godwin, the dreamer who had met her poet lover by her mother's grave, the young woman who had survived scandal and tragedy, had created something immortal. She had taken the disparate elements of her life, the philosophy of her parents, the gloom of a volcanic winter, the spark of a ghost story competition, and the terror of a nightmare, and, like a scientist in her laboratory, she had assembled them into a living, breathing work of art. And so, our first section concludes. We have not yet opened the book itself, but we have, I hope, prepared the ground. We have seen the world that made Mary and the experiences that made Frankenstein. We have sat with her through the rain-swept nights at the Villa Diodati and felt the thrill of her waking dream. We understand that this is not just a story about a monster. It is a story born from the very fabric of an extraordinary life, a story that asks the most fundamental questions about what it means to create, what it means to be abandoned, and what it means to be human. When we return, we will open the cover of the 1818 edition and begin with the first of Captain Walton's letters from the frozen expanse of the Arctic, where a desperate, lonely man in search of glory is about to meet another. Until then, allow the quiet darkness to settle. Let the story of this Genesis be a calm and steady presence, a foundation upon which the more troubled dreams to come may be built. Rest now and let your own mind drift in the quiet wake of creation. We have left the world of drawing rooms and rainy villas. We have left behind the story of Mary Shelley's own Genesis, her waking dream, and the crucible of grief and genius in which her novel was forged. Now we open the book itself. The air grows colder. The sounds of society fade, replaced by the profound and intimidating silence of the far north. Our story begins at what feels like the very edge of the known world, in a place of ice and ambition, of vast, empty landscapes and a solitary, yearning heart. We do not meet Victor Frankenstein first, nor do we meet his creation. Instead, Mary Shelley introduces us to a man who is, in many ways, a mirror. A man who shares the same fire of ambition, the same thirst for glory, the same deep-seated loneliness that will drive the central tragedy of our story. We begin with a series of letters written in a steady, elegant hand, from a man named Robert Walton to the one person in the world he feels he can confide in, his beloved sister, Mrs. Saville, back in the safety and comfort of England. These letters are our way into the narrative. They are a frame, an anchor in a sea of incredible and terrifying events. Through Walton's eyes, we will approach the central story, and it is his voice, full of hope and a yearning for connection, that we must first come to know. Let us settle in then and imagine the scene. A man in a cold foreign city, dipping his quill in ink, the scratching sound a small defiance against the immense silence of the northern winter. He is writing home. He is writing to his sister, Margaret, and he is full of his grand purpose. The first letter is dated December 11th, from the city of St. Petersburg in Russia. The year is not explicitly stated, but we can feel we are in that same late 18th or early 19th century world of scientific curiosity and romantic exploration. Walton begins with a sense of triumph and reassurance. He writes to tell his sister that he has arrived safely and that his great enterprise is well underway. His tone is one of almost boyish excitement, tempered by the formal language of the age. He feels the need to convince her, and perhaps himself, of the rightness of his quest. What is this quest? It is a magnificent and perilous one. Walton intends to sail to the North Pole. He is an explorer, driven by a dream that has possessed him since he was a boy. He lists his goals with a fervent, almost breathless enthusiasm. He hopes to discover a northern passage to the Pacific which would revolutionize global trade and connect the distant corners of the world. But his ambitions are not merely commercial. They are scientific, romantic, and deeply personal. He speaks of the pole as a region of eternal light, a place where the secrets of the cosmos might be revealed. He yearns to discover the secret of the magnet, to unravel one of the fundamental mysteries of the planet. And more than that, he yearns for glory. He wants to tread upon a land where no man has trod before. He wants to achieve something great, something that will etch his name into the annals of history. As we listen to him describe his dream, we can feel the sheer force of his will. This expedition has been the favorite dream of my early years, he writes. I have read with ardor the accounts of the various voyages which have been made in the prospect of arriving at the North Pacific Ocean through the seas of Russia. He has prepared himself meticulously. He spent his youth enduring hardship, accompanying whalers on dangerous voyages in the North Sea, voluntarily subjecting himself to cold, famine, thirst, and a lack of sleep. He has studied mathematics, medicine, and physical science. He has mortgaged his inheritance and spent his fortune to hire a ship and a crew. He is a man utterly possessed by a single, all-consuming idea. In this, we see the first faint echo of Victor Frankenstein. This is the same language of obsession, the same singular focus that we will soon come to know so well. Walton is a man who believes in the power of the human will to overcome any obstacle. He is a product of his age, an age that believed in progress, in discovery, in the limitless potential of mankind. But beneath this surface of confident ambition, a deeper, more melancholic note is sounded. It is the theme of loneliness. After detailing his grand plans, his voice softens. He confesses to his sister the one thing his ambition cannot provide him. "I have no friend, Margaret," he writes. "When I am glowing with the enthusiasm of success, there will be none to participate my joy. If I am assailed by disappointment, no one will endeavor to sustain me in dejection." This is the central ache of his existence. He is surrounded by his crew, good and capable men, but he feels utterly alone. His dreams are too grand, his sensibilities too refined for them to understand. He yearns for a companion, an equal, a soul who can meet him on his own intellectual and emotional plane. "I desire the company of a man who could sympathize with me, whose eyes would reply to mine," he writes. He wants a friend who is gentle yet courageous, possessed of a cultivated as well as of a capacious mind, whose tastes are like my own. He wants someone to share in his triumphs, but also someone to correct his faults, to temper his passions, to be a true partner in the journey of life. He feels this absence as a profound and painful void. This yearning for a friend, for a kindred spirit, is the emotional heart of this opening section. It is a desire that will be tragically answered, and it is a desire that will be mirrored with devastating consequences in the lament of the creature Victor Frankenstein will soon bring to life. The need for connection, for companionship, for someone to see us and understand us, is established here as one of the novel's most fundamental themes. Walton concludes his first letter with promises to write again, his spirits buoyed by the act of communication itself. He is about to depart for Archangel, another Russian port city, where he will charter his vessel and complete his crew. He is on the cusp of his great adventure, a man burning with ambition, yet haunted by a deep and persistent loneliness. The second letter finds him in Archangel, dated March 28th of the following year. The winter has passed and the sea is beginning to thaw. His ship has been hired, his crew is assembled, and his departure is imminent. Yet the tone of this letter is even more melancholic than the first. The enforced idleness of waiting has only sharpened his sense of isolation. "My hopes," he writes, "are high, but my spirits often sink low." And again he returns to his singular, aching need. "I have no friend." He tries to explain to Margaret why the companionship of his lieutenant, a good and brave man, is not enough. The man is competent, but he is a creature of invincible ignorance and total want of cultivation. He is not the soulmate Walton seeks. This might sound arrogant, but it comes from a place of deep-seated need. Walton describes himself as a self-educated man, a romantic who was once a failed poet. For a year he had dreamed of being a great writer, of finding his place among the likes of Homer and Shakespeare. But he failed. And so he turned his passionate, creative energy towards science and exploration. He is a man of deep feeling and high intellect, and he feels this combination sets him apart, isolates him from the more practical men around him. To illustrate the kind of noble character he admires, and perhaps to distract himself from his own loneliness, Walton relates a small, embedded story. It is the story of his ship's master. The master is a gentle, quiet, and remarkably generous man. Walton tells of how the master once loved a wealthy Russian lady. He had won her affection, but she was also loved by another man, a man who was poor and heartbroken by her engagement to the master. Upon discovering his rival's despair, the master, in an act of extraordinary selflessness, gave up his own claim. Not only that, he gave the young man the farm and prize money he had saved, allowing his rival to marry the woman he loved. Let us pause on this small tale. In a novel that will be filled with monstrous selfishness and tragic miscommunication, this story stands out as a beacon of pure, selfless generosity. The master gives up his own happiness for the sake of another. He acts out of pure empathy. This is the kind of nobility that Walton admires, and it stands in stark contrast to the all-consuming, self-centered ambition that drives Walton himself, and will later drive Victor Frankenstein to his ruin. The story of the master is a small, quiet lesson in what it means to be truly human, a lesson that the main characters of the novel will spectacularly fail to learn. After recounting this story, Walton's thoughts return to his own state. The example of the master's quiet virtue only makes him feel his own isolation more keenly. He ends his letter with a familiar mix of high hope and deep sadness. He is about to sail into the unknown, and he is still alone. "But I have one means of preserving my spirits," he tells his sister, "my perpetual hard work. But what will be my reward? A cold northern blast, a sea of ice, and the bitter sting of loneliness." The third letter is very brief, a quick note sent by a merchant ship they encounter on their journey. It is dated July the 7th. Walton's mood has swung back to one of exultant confidence. He is finally at sea, his quest truly begun. The melancholy of Archangel has been burned away by the thrill of action. He writes to Margaret, "I am in good health and my spirits are high. The men are in good spirits too. I am going to unexplored regions, to the land of mist and snow, but I shall kill no albatross." This is a direct reference to Samuel Taylor Coleridge's famous poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, a poem Mary Shelley knew well. In it, a sailor senselessly kills an albatross, a bird of good omen, and brings a terrible curse down upon his ship and crew. Walton's comment is meant to be reassuring, a promise that he will not commit such a senseless act of transgression against nature. It is a promise freighted with a dramatic irony that neither he nor the reader can yet fully appreciate, for he is about to welcome aboard his ship a man who has committed a far greater transgression. His confidence in this short letter is absolute. He feels that he is a master of his own destiny. What can stop the determined heart and resolved will of man? He asks rhetorically. This single line is a perfect encapsulation of the spirit of romantic hubris. It is the voice of mankind standing on the precipice of the modern age, believing that through sheer force of will, any mystery can be solved, any boundary crossed, any obstacle overcome. It is a belief that is about to be shattered in the most profound and terrifying way imaginable. He signs off, full of hope, sailing north into the unknown. And then comes the fourth letter, a series of entries written over several weeks in August. The tone has changed dramatically. The triumphant confidence is gone, replaced by anxiety and awe. Walton's ship is trapped. It is surrounded on all sides by a vast, impassable field of ice. The forward momentum has come to a grinding halt. The ship is enclosed, a tiny, fragile speck of human endeavor in an immense, indifferent and alien landscape. The fog is so thick they can see nothing, only hear the cracking of the ice and the groan of the sea. They are suspended, waiting, in a state of profound uncertainty. It is in this strange, liminal state, trapped between motion and stillness, between the known and the unknown, that the first strange event occurs. On July 31st, as the mist clears, the crew sees something that astonishes them. Far off, about half a mile away, they behold a figure traveling across the ice. It is a man, but one of gigantic stature. He is not on foot. He is seated in a sledge, a low carriage on runners, which is being pulled by dogs. Let us picture this scene, the endless, blinding white of the ice field, the profound silence, and then this impossible vision, a single, colossal figure moving with purpose across the desolate landscape heading north. The crew watches through their telescopes, transfixed, until the shape is lost in the distance and the mist. The sight is inexplicable, ghostly. Who could this being be? Where could he have come from? Where is he going in this wasteland at the top of the world? The sailors are filled with a superstitious dread. Walton, the man of science, is filled with a profound and unsettling wonder. The impossible has just crossed his path. The next morning brings another, even stranger encounter. The ice has broken up overnight, and the ship is now free, but it is still surrounded by floating ice floes. As the sun rises, they see that one of these large pieces of ice carries a passenger. On it is another sledge, much like the one they saw the day before, but this one is in a wrecked state. All but one of its dogs are dead. And seated in the sledge is a man. This man is not a giant. He is a European, and he is in a terrible state. He is emaciated, almost frozen to death, his body worn down by fatigue and suffering. The crew brings the man aboard their ship. He is so weak he cannot even walk. They carry him to the cabin, wrap him in blankets, and rub him with brandy, slowly, painstakingly, bringing him back from the brink of death. As he slowly recovers, Walton finds himself drawn to this mysterious stranger. He is not a savage inhabitant of some undiscovered island, as Walton might have expected. He is a man of culture, of refinement. His accent is foreign, but his English is articulate and eloquent. But what strikes Walton most is the expression on his face. It is an expression of profound, soul-deep misery, of a wildness and madness in his eyes. But underneath it all, there is a look of benevolence and nobility. He is, Walton writes, a celestial spirit that has been occupied in traversing dungeons of gloom. He is a beautiful, magnificent ruin. Before the stranger would even agree to come aboard, he had asked a single, bizarre question. Seeing the ship and near death himself, his first words to Walton were, "Before I come on board your vessel, will you have the kindness to inform me whither you are bound?" Only when Walton tells him that they are heading north on a voyage of discovery does the man consent to be rescued. This single detail tells us everything we need to know about him. His own life is secondary. All that matters is his pursuit. He is a man driven by an obsession so powerful that it eclipses his own will to live. Over the next few days, as the stranger slowly regains his strength, a deep bond forms between him and Walton. Walton, the lonely captain, believes he has finally found the friend he has been searching for. Here is a man of sensitivity, of intellect, of a noble and cultivated spirit. He feels a profound sympathy and affection for him. "I begin to love him as a brother," he writes to Margaret, "and I feel that his presence will be a blessing to me." But it is a tragic, one-sided friendship. The stranger, whose name we soon learn is Victor Frankenstein, is a broken man. He is capable of kindness and gratitude, but he is consumed by a grief so vast that it leaves little room for anything else. He is prone to long periods of silence and despair, his face clouded by a sorrow that Walton cannot begin to comprehend. At one point, the crew catches sight of the gigantic figure on the sledge again, far off on the ice. When Walton mentions this to Frankenstein, the man becomes intensely agitated. He questions Walton relentlessly about the direction the figure was heading. It is clear that this giant is the object of Frankenstein's obsessive pursuit. Walton, full of his own ambition, speaks to Frankenstein of his hopes for glory, of his desire to make a great discovery. It is this that finally unlocks the stranger's silence. A shadow of his former self flickers to life. He looks at Walton with an expression of profound pity and regret. "Unhappy man," Frankenstein exclaims. "Do you share my madness? Have you drunk also of the intoxicating draught?" And then he makes a decision. Seeing in Walton the same passionate, ambitious fire that led to his own damnation, Victor Frankenstein decides to tell his story. It will be a cautionary tale. It will be a confession. He hopes that by revealing the full horror of his own experience, he can save Walton from a similar fate. "You seek for knowledge and wisdom, as I once did," Frankenstein tells him, his voice filled with a weary sadness. "And I ardently hope that the gratification of your wishes may not be a serpent to sting you, as mine has been. I do not know that the relation of my disasters will be useful to you, yet, when I reflect that you are pursuing the same course, exposing yourself to the same dangers which have rendered me what I am, I imagine that you may deduce an apt moral from my tale." And so, the frame is complete. The stage is set. We have journeyed with Robert Walton from the drawing rooms of England to the frozen seas of the north. We have felt his ambition, his loneliness, and his dawning sense of wonder and dread. We have met the strange, broken, noble man he has rescued from the ice. And now, this man is about to speak. He is about to unravel a story of creation and destruction, of love and abandonment, of a pursuit that has led him to the desolate ends of the earth. Our section ends here, in the quiet of the captain's cabin, on a ship surrounded by a silent sea of ice. Walton has taken up his pen, ready to record the stranger's incredible narrative. And we, like him, are ready to listen. We will now leave the voice of Robert Walton and enter the memory of Victor Frankenstein. The journey inward is about to begin. Let the silence of the Arctic settle around you. Let the promise of this dark and wondrous tale be a steadying presence. There will be time enough for horror, For now, there is only the quiet anticipation, the calm before the storm. Rest now, in this moment of quiet suspension, at the very edge of the world. We are on a ship, locked in a sea of ice at the top of the world. The wind howls a distant, lonely song. But for now, we turn our attention away from the vast frozen expanse outside. We turn inward, into the captain's cabin, into the past. The stranger, the man rescued from the ice, has begun to speak. His name is Victor Frankenstein, and his voice, though weakened by suffering, commands our full attention. He is about to paint a picture for us, a picture of a life that was once so full of light and love that its loss seems almost inconceivable. This is a story of origins, not the origin of a monster, not yet, but the origin of the man who would create him. To understand the darkness that is to come, we must first spend some time in the light that preceded it. We must understand the paradise that was lost, for only then can we comprehend the true depth of the fall. So let us quiet our minds and travel back with Victor Frankenstein to the sunlit shores of Lake Geneva, to a childhood that seemed, for a time, to be a perfect and unassailable fortress of happiness. Victor begins his story not with himself, but with his family. His roots, he tells us, are Genevan. He comes from a distinguished lineage, a family respected for generations in the small, independent Republic of Geneva. His father, Alphonse Frankenstein, was a man of public renown, a syndic who had served his country with honor and integrity. But Victor remembers him not as a public figure, but as a father, a husband, a man of profound kindness and unwavering devotion. To illustrate the character of his father, Victor tells us the story of his parents' union. It is a story that, in itself, is a small, perfect fable of rescue and romantic devotion. Alphonse Frankenstein's dearest friend was a merchant named Beaufort. Beaufort had once been a man of wealth and status, but through a series of misfortunes, he had been reduced to utter poverty. A proud and sensitive man, he could not bear this fall from grace. He retreated from the world, taking his only daughter, Caroline, with him to the city of Lucerne. There, they lived in obscurity and poverty, Beaufort's spirit slowly crushed by his sorrow and shame. For 10 months, Alphonse Frankenstein searched for his lost friend. When he finally found Beaufort's dwelling, it was too late. He arrived only to find his friend's daughter, Caroline, weeping beside her father's coffin. Beaufort had died in her arms, leaving her an orphan and a beggar in a world that offered little mercy to such a woman. Let us pause and consider this scene. It is one of pure Gothic pathos. The desolate room, the grieving daughter, the deceased father ruined by pride. Into this scene of despair steps Alphonse Frankenstein, not as a lover, but as a protector, a guardian angel. He took Caroline under his care, placing her with relatives and ensuring her well-being. He was her father's friend, and he became her shield against the harshness of the world. For 2 years, he nurtured her back to health and spirit. And in that time, their relationship, founded on gratitude and protective tenderness, blossomed into love. They were married, a union built not on youthful passion, but on a deep, abiding foundation of mutual respect and gentle affection. This is the foundation of Victor's world. His parents' marriage is the bedrock of his idyllic childhood. He describes his father's devotion to his mother as something absolute. After their marriage, Alphonse gave up his public life to dedicate himself entirely to his wife and soon to their child. Victor was their firstborn, and he speaks of his early years as if they were a dream. "I was their plaything and their idol," he says, "and something better, their child, the innocent and helpless creature bestowed on them by heaven, whom to bring up to good, and whose future lot it was in their hands to direct to happiness or misery, according as they fulfilled their duties towards me." He was showered with love, with a stream of placid happiness. His parents were not tyrants, they were gentle guides, their authority expressed only through love and kindness. He speaks of their smiles of benevolent pleasure and looks of tender affection. It is a picture of perfect domestic harmony, a sanctuary walled off from the sorrows of the outside world. He was a child who knew no hardship, no neglect, no want of love. This perfect, unbroken happiness is crucial. It is the high peak from which he will eventually fall, and it perhaps explains why he was so ill-equipped to handle the adversity and moral complexity that would later confront him. A life without shadow provides no training for the dark. One of the defining acts of his mother's benevolence, and a pivotal event in Victor's young life, occurred during a trip into the poorer regions of Italy. While visiting the shores of Lake Como, his mother, Caroline, ever the charitable soul, would often visit the cottages of the local peasants. On one of these excursions, Victor, then a small boy, accompanied her. In one particular cottage, they found a family of peasants with 5 children. 4 of them were dark-haired, sturdy little creatures. But the 5th was startlingly different. She was a little girl who, Victor says, appeared of a different stock. He describes her with the language of a connoisseur discovering a rare jewel. Her hair was the brightest living gold, her brow was lofty and clear, and her eyes were a deep and soulful blue. She was thin and pale, but her entire being seemed to radiate a kind of ethereal light. She was, he recalls, a being of a distinct species, a celestial spirit. His mother was immediately captivated by this beautiful, otherworldly child. Upon inquiry, she learned that the girl, named Elizabeth Lavenza, was not the peasant's daughter. She was the orphan of a German nobleman and an Italian lady. Her mother had died in childbirth, and her father, a patriot, had been lost to the wars that plagued the country. The peasant family had taken her in and raised her as their own, despite their poverty. Victor Frankenstein, whose own history as an orphan made her deeply sympathetic, decided she must have this child. She persuaded the peasants, who loved Elizabeth but knew they could not provide for her properly, to allow her to adopt the girl. And so, Elizabeth Lavenza was brought back to Geneva to be raised as a Frankenstein. The way Victor describes Elizabeth's arrival is deeply revealing. He does not say, "My parents brought home a new sister for me." Instead, he recalls his mother presenting the child to him with the words, "I have a pretty present for my Victor. Tomorrow he shall have it." From that moment on, Victor considered Elizabeth to be his possession. "I looked upon Elizabeth as mine," he says, "mine to protect, love, and cherish. All praises bestowed on her I received as made to a possession of my own." He speaks of her with an intense, proprietary adoration. She is his more than sister, his beautiful and gentle companion. Their bond is immediate and deep, but it is a bond predicated on his sense of ownership. She is the beautiful object, and he is her devoted guardian. This is not a relationship of equals. It is one of idealization, of placing Elizabeth on a pedestal from which she can never descend. She is his saint, his angel, the embodiment of passive, feminine virtue. This dynamic shapes their entire childhood. Victor was a boy of intense, sometimes violent passions, with a thirst for knowledge that was deep and ardent. Elizabeth, by contrast, was the calming influence. She was serene, gentle, and utterly devoted to the world of poetry and the sublime beauty of nature. He was the storm, she was the quiet harbor. She was the living spirit of love to soften and attract, he says. I was capable of a more intense application and was more deeply smitten with the thirst for knowledge. They were 2 halves of a whole, but a whole defined by traditional and somewhat rigid gender roles. He is the active principle, the seeker. She is the passive principle, the muse. Soon, a 3rd figure joined their small, idyllic world. This was Henry Clerval, the son of a Genevan merchant and Victor's dearest friend. If Elizabeth represented the gentle, domestic virtues, Clerval represented the spirit of romantic adventure and moral imagination. He was, Victor tells us, a boy of marvelous talent and genius. But his genius was not like Victor's. Clerval was not interested in the hidden laws of nature or the physical secrets of the world. He was fascinated by the moral relations of things. He loved tales of chivalry and romance, plays and epic poems. He composed heroic songs, wrote fairy tales, and organized theatricals in which he and his friends would play the parts of legendary heroes like Robin Hood and King Arthur. Clerval was the boy of action, of imagination, of human connection. He was driven by a desire for enterprise, hardship, and even danger for its own sake. He dreamed of being a great adventurer, a famous name in the annals of discovery, but his discoveries were to be of cultures and human achievements, not of scientific principles. The trio, Victor, Elizabeth, and Henry, formed a perfect, self-contained universe. Their childhood was one of shared studies, of long walks by the shores of the lake, of boat trips under the shadow of the mighty Alps. Victor emphasizes the profound harmony of their relationships. "We were never without companions," he says, "but we loved each other better, and were never so happy as when we were alone together." There were no quarrels, no rivalries. They were a trinity of youthful affection, each complementing the others. Victor's description of his home life is a portrait of an earthly paradise. His parents were loving and indulgent. His companions were perfectly suited to his temperament. He was free to pursue his own interests, to roam the sublime landscapes of his native country, a world of placid lakes, green valleys, and the awesome, magnificent presence of Mont Blanc and the surrounding Alps. This landscape itself became a character in his life, a source of profound inspiration, and later, a place of refuge from his self-inflicted torment. "The world was to me a secret which I desired to divine," he says. This single sentence captures the essence of his intellectual drive. He was not content to simply observe nature's beauty, as Elizabeth was, or to imagine heroic deeds within it, as Clerval did. He wanted to penetrate its surface, to tear aside the veil and understand its fundamental, hidden workings. He wanted to know the secrets of heaven and earth. This thirst for hidden knowledge led him down a peculiar intellectual path. While Clerval was reading epic poetry, Victor found himself drawn to a different, more arcane set of masters. One day, on a trip with his family to the baths near Thonon, bad weather confined them to their inn. It was there that Victor found a book that would change the course of his intellectual life. It was a volume by the 16th century occult philosopher Cornelius Agrippa. He opened it with a feeling of awe and began to read. He was immediately captivated. Here was a world of thought that promised not just knowledge, and his father, on seeing the book, casually remarked, "Ah, Cornelius Agrippa, my dear Victor, do not waste your time upon this. It is sad trash." This, Victor reflects, was a pivotal moment of failed parental guidance. Had his father taken the time to explain why Agrippa was trash, to show him how modern science had superseded these ancient theories, Victor might have been satisfied. He might have turned his curious mind toward more productive channels. But his father's casual, unexplained dismissal had the opposite effect. It added a sense of the forbidden to his new passion. If his father thought it was worthless, there must be something secret and powerful within it that he was not meant to know. And so, his fascination only grew. He secretly devoured the works not only of Agrippa, but also of other similar figures, Paracelsus and Albertus Magnus. These were the alchemists, the natural philosophers of a bygone era, who sought not merely to understand the world, but to command it. They wrote of the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, the ability to transmute base metals into gold, and, most tantalizingly of all, the power to summon ghosts and devils. Victor became their disciple. He set up his own small laboratory and began to conduct experiments, trying to replicate their mystical processes. He read their works with an unremitting ardor, believing that he was on the verge of discovering great secrets. "My dreams were therefore undisturbed by reality," he says, "and I entered with the greatest diligence into the search of the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. But the latter obtained my most undivided attention. Wealth was an inferior object, but what glory would attend the discovery if I could banish disease from the human frame and render man invulnerable to any but a violent death?" Here, in this youthful obsession, we see the seeds of his future ambition. It is a desire to overcome the fundamental limitations of human existence, disease and death. It is a desire for glory, for the power of a god. He pursued these chimerical goals with the same obsessive intensity that he would later apply to his final terrible project. He was living in a world of intellectual fantasy, completely out of step with the scientific progress of his own age. The moment that shattered this fantasy arrived with the force of a lightning bolt, literally. When he was about 15 years old, he witnessed a violent thunderstorm from his family's home at Bellerive. He watched with a mixture of curiosity and terror as the storm raged over the lake and the mountains. Then, he saw something incredible. A bolt of lightning, a A stream of fire issued from the sky and struck a beautiful old oak tree that stood about 20 yards from their house. A moment later, nothing remained of the tree but a blasted, shattered stump. The next morning, he went to examine it. The tree was not merely splintered, it was utterly annihilated, its wood shredded into thin ribbons of fiber. The event filled him with astonishment. He had never seen anything so utterly destroyed. That day, a man of learning, a natural philosopher who was visiting the family, happened to witness Victor's fascination. He proceeded to explain to Victor the principles of electricity and galvanism. He described the recent experiments, the workings of the electrical kite, and the power hidden within this natural force. The explanation was a revelation. It was like a new light dawning in his mind. All that I had read concerning galvanism, Victor says, instantly appeared to me as a chimera, a foolish dream. The works of his beloved masters Agrippa and Paracelsus suddenly seemed paltry and outdated in the face of this real, demonstrable, and terrifyingly powerful force of nature. He felt a sense of profound disgust and renounced his old studies. I at once gave up my former occupations, he says, and extended my inquiries to the borders of creation, searching for the clue to the hidden laws of nature. He turned his attention to mathematics and the more grounded branches of science. For a time, it seemed as if this encounter with reality had set him on a more sober and productive path. It was, he reflects, the last effort made by the spirit of preservation to avert the storm that was even then hanging in the stars and ready to envelop me. It was his last chance to turn back. But fate, as he calls it, was not to be resisted. The time came for him to leave the paradise of his childhood and continue his education at the university. He was to go to Ingolstadt in Germany. His departure was set for when he turned 17. But just before he was to leave, the first great sorrow of his life occurred. The first crack appeared in the perfect fortress of his family's happiness. Elizabeth, his beloved companion, contracted scarlet fever. Her illness was severe, and her life was in danger. His mother, Caroline, insisted on nursing Elizabeth herself, despite the risk of infection. She could not bear the thought of leaving her adopted daughter in the care of hired nurses. Through her devoted care, Elizabeth began to recover, but Caroline's victory was a fatal one. She herself caught the fever from Elizabeth. The disease, attacking a constitution weakened by years of devotion to her family, was far more virulent. She declined rapidly. Victor describes his mother's deathbed scene with a quiet, heartbreaking solemnity. Knowing she was dying, she called Victor and Elizabeth to her side. She joined their hands together. "My children," she said, "my firmest hopes of future happiness were placed on the prospect of your union. This union you must hereafter solemnize and fulfill. Elizabeth, my love, you must supply my place to my younger children. Alas, I regret that I am taken from you, and happy and beloved as I have been, is it not hard to quit you all? But these are not thoughts befitting me. I will endeavor to resign myself cheerfully to death, and will indulge a hope of meeting you in another world." She died peacefully, and with her death, Victor's world was irrevocably broken. It is so long before the mind can persuade itself that she whom we saw every day, and whose very existence appeared a part of our own, can have departed forever, he laments. The first consciousness of the irrecoverable is the first anguish of the soul. This was his first encounter with the finality of death, the first true sorrow of his insulated life. The idyllic world he had known was gone. A deep melancholy settled over their house. His departure for university was delayed as the family mourned. He describes Elizabeth's grief not as a passionate outburst, but as a quiet, stoic sorrow. She concealed her own pain to comfort the others, taking on the maternal role her dying mother had assigned her. She became the bond of union for the grieving family. Henry Clerval too was a great comfort, his gentle friendship a balm to Victor's wounded spirit. Finally, the day of his departure arrived. It was a melancholy parting. He was leaving behind his grieving father, his beloved Elizabeth, his younger brothers, and his dearest friend. Clerval, whose own father, a narrow-minded merchant, did not approve of a liberal education, was desperate to go with him, but was forbidden. And so, Victor set out alone. He describes his journey to Ingolstadt as a lonely one. For the first time, he was truly on his own, cut off from the web of love and protection that had defined his entire existence. I, who had ever been surrounded by amiable companions, he says, was now alone. The beauty of the landscape, which had once filled him with joy, now only deepened his sense of melancholy. He arrived in Ingolstadt with a heavy heart, feeling like a stranger in a strange land. And here our section ends. Victor Frankenstein stands on the threshold of a new life. He has left the garden of his childhood. He carries with him the weight of his first great sorrow, the unresolved grief for his mother. He carries with him an unguided but brilliant intellect, a dangerous fascination with the secrets of nature, and a powerful, obsessive ambition that has, until now, been latent. The idyllic world that nurtured him is gone. The gentle influences of Elizabeth and Clerval are far away. He is alone, in a new place, a place of learning, a place where his thirst for knowledge will be encouraged by new masters, and where he will finally find the tools to pursue his most dangerous and terrible dream. The paradise has been lost. The stage is now set for the tragedy to begin. Let us leave him there, for now, a solitary figure at the gates of the university, at the gates of his own destiny. Rest in this moment of transition, this quiet pause before the fall. We join Victor Frankenstein at a moment of profound transition. The carriage has deposited him in the town of Ingolstadt. The familiar peaks of the Alps are gone, replaced by the foreign architecture of a German university town. The loving faces of his family are now just memories. He is alone, adrift, a student not only of science, but of a new and lonely existence. The melancholy of his mother's death still clings to him like a shroud. This is not the eager, bright-eyed student arriving for his first taste of freedom. This is a young man already acquainted with grief, and his solitude here, in this new place, only amplifies his sense of loss. He begins his academic life not with a burst of enthusiasm, but with a sense of duty and a heavy heart. One of the first things he does is to seek out the professors of natural philosophy, the field to which he intends to dedicate himself. This act, which should be the beginning of an exciting intellectual journey, instead leads to his first moment of profound disillusionment. His first visit is to a professor named M. Krempe. Krempe is a professor of natural philosophy, but Victor describes him as an unpleasant man. He is squat, with a gruff voice and a repulsive countenance. He is, in short, the very opposite of the idealized, noble figures Victor has known in his life. When Krempe asks Victor about his progress in the sciences, Victor, with a degree of youthful naivete, recounts his long and ardent study of the alchemists, Cornelius Agrippa, Paracelsus, and Albertus Magnus. He speaks of them as his guides, the masters who first ignited his passion for the secrets of nature. Krempe's reaction is not one of gentle correction, but of explosive contempt. "Have you really spent your time in studying such nonsense?" he exclaims, bursting into a loud, mocking laugh. He tells Victor that every minute he has spent on these musty and exploded authors has been a minute utterly wasted. "You must begin your studies entirely anew," he declares. He scribbles out a list of proper modern scientific texts and dismisses Victor, leaving the young man feeling foolish, angry, and deeply disheartened. This encounter is a brutal shock to Victor's system. He had come to the university to pursue the very knowledge that this professor now holds in utter contempt. His intellectual heroes are derided as charlatans, his years of passionate study dismissed as childish fantasy. He leaves Krempe's presence with a feeling of profound distaste, not only for the professor himself, but for the entire branch of modern science that the man represents. If this uncouth, smug individual is the face of modern chemistry, Victor wants no part of it. His ambition, which had survived the shock of the lightning-blasted oak, seems to be extinguished by the professor's scorn. For a time, he resolves to abandon natural philosophy altogether and dedicate himself to the study of languages, a field far removed from the disillusioning world of M. Krempe. But fate, as Victor so often calls it, had other plans. It intervened in the form of a second professor. A few days after his disheartening meeting, Victor happened to wander into a lecture hall where another man was scheduled to speak. He went not out of interest, but simply because he had nowhere else to be. This was to be a lecture by Monsieur Waldman, the professor of chemistry. Victor entered with prejudice in his heart, expecting another M. Kremper. But the man who stepped up to the podium was entirely different. Victor describes Monsieur Waldman with an immediate sense of reverence. He was a man of about 50, with a kind and benevolent aspect. His hair was grey, but his posture was erect. Unlike Kremper's gruff pronouncements, Waldman's voice was, Victor recalls, the sweetest I had ever heard. This man did not begin his lecture with scorn for the past. Instead, he began with a sweeping philosophical history of chemistry, and in doing so, he performed a kind of magic. He validated all of Victor's youthful passions, while simultaneously pointing him toward a new and far more powerful path. Monsieur Waldman paid tribute to the ancient masters, the very alchemists that Kremper had so crudely mocked. He spoke of them not as fools, but as men of genius whose ambitions were grand and noble. The ancient teachers of this science, Waldman declared, promised impossibilities and performed nothing. The modern masters promise very little. They know that metals cannot be transmuted and that the elixir of life is a chimera. But these philosophers, whose hands seem only made to dabble in dirt and their eyes to pore over the microscope or crucible, have indeed performed miracles. They have penetrated into the recesses of nature and shown how she works in her hiding places. They ascend into the heavens. They have discovered how the blood circulates and the nature of the air we breathe. They have acquired new and almost unlimited powers. They can command the thunders of heaven, mimic the earthquake, and even mock the invisible world with its own shadows. Let us linger on these words. For Victor, they are a revelation. Monsieur Waldman has just built a bridge between his old world and the new. He has taken the grand, glorious ambitions of the alchemists, the desire to command nature, to acquire unlimited power, to mock the invisible world, and has shown that modern science is not their enemy, but their true inheritor. Modern chemistry is the tool, the method by which those glorious, godlike ambitions could actually be achieved. It was not a renunciation of his dreams, it was the key to their fulfillment. The lecture electrified Victor. His apathy vanished, replaced by a surge of renewed purpose. The path was now clear. He would become a modern scientist, but he would do so with the soul of an ancient alchemist. He would wield the new tools to achieve the old, forbidden goals. After the lecture, his spirit soaring, Victor approached Monsieur Waldman. He introduced himself and, with a newfound confidence, confessed his former devotion to the alchemists. Unlike Kremper, Waldman did not laugh. He listened with patience and respect. He acknowledged the passion of the old masters and then gently guided Victor toward the modern curriculum, echoing Kremper's reading list but with a spirit of encouragement rather than contempt. He saw the fire in the young man's eyes. He invited Victor to his laboratory the following day. This conversation sealed Victor's fate. Thus ended a day memorable to me, Victor reflects. It decided my future destiny. He had found his mentor. He had found his calling. The solitary, grieving boy who had arrived in Ingolstadt just a few days earlier was gone. In his place stood a new being, Victor Frankenstein, the dedicated student of science, his mind ablaze with the possibility of unlocking the deepest secrets of creation. For the next 2 years, Victor plunged into his studies with an intensity that bordered on the superhuman. He became a man possessed. Natural philosophy, and particularly chemistry, became his sole, all-consuming passion. He describes his application as unremitting. He rarely left the university, foregoing trips home to Geneva. The letters from his family, once the center of his world, now became a chore, a distraction from his great work. He lived in his laboratory, surrounded by his instruments and his books. His progress was astonishing. He quickly surpassed all of his fellow students. His singular focus and brilliant mind allowed him to learn with incredible speed. In less than 2 years, he had mastered everything his professors could teach him. He was no longer just a student. He was their peer, a celebrated prodigy whose name was known throughout the university. M. Waldman spoke of him with pride, and even the gruff Kremper acknowledged him as his most brilliant pupil. But this intellectual triumph came at a great personal cost. He became a recluse. My cheek had grown pale with study, he recalls, and my person had become emaciated with confinement. The vibrant, healthy boy who had roamed the Swiss mountains was replaced by a pallid, gaunt figure who rarely saw the sun. He neglected his friends, his family, and his own physical well-being. He was burning the candle of his life at both ends, sacrificing his humanity on the altar of his ambition. He was becoming, in essence, a machine for acquiring knowledge. Having mastered the known sciences, his restless mind inevitably turned toward the unknown. His old obsession, the one that had first captivated him in the pages of Cornelius Agrippa, returned with a new and terrifying force. He became fascinated with the fundamental question that lies at the heart of biology and metaphysics. Whence, he asked himself, did the principle of life proceed? It was a question that science had not yet answered. It was the final frontier, the ultimate secret. And Victor, in his hubris, believed he was the man destined to uncover it. To answer this question, he knew he had to understand its opposite, death. He began to study anatomy, but he was not content with the orderly dissection of specimens provided by the university. He needed to observe the process of decay, the slow, grim transformation of living flesh back into inanimate matter. He began to haunt places of death. To examine the causes of life, he says, we must first have recourse to death. He forced himself to study the minutiae of anatomy, to trace the corruption of the human body. He spent his days in dissecting rooms and his nights in charnel houses, the vaults where bones and decomposing remains were kept. Let us picture him now. No longer the noble student in Waldman's pristine laboratory, but a solitary, shadowy figure surrounded by the grim reality of human decay. His scientific inquiry had led him to the most horrific and profane of settings. But his obsession was so great, he tells us, that he was blind to the horror of his new occupation. His senses were numbed by the intensity of his quest. I saw how the fine form of man was degraded and wasted, he recalls. I beheld the corruption of death succeed to the blooming cheek of life. I saw how the worm inherited the wonders of the eye and brain. But instead of being repulsed, he was driven onward, convinced that in this corruption he would find the secret to its opposite. And then, one day, after countless nights of this unhallowed toil, he found it. The narrative is famously, and perhaps wisely, silent on the exact nature of his discovery. He does not give us the formula. He simply says that after days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. Nay, more, I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. The moment of discovery was one of sublime, terrifying ecstasy. I was dizzy with the great discovery, he says. The power he now held was beyond anything he had ever imagined. It was the power of a god. He could reverse death. He could create life. His mind reeled with the possibilities. A new species would bless me as its creator and source, he mused. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. The lonely boy from Geneva now dreamed of being the father to an entire race of beings, a race that would worship and adore him. His ambition had reached its zenith. He was on the verge of becoming the modern Prometheus. For a time he hesitated. Should he use this power? Should he dare to assemble a being and breathe life into it? The hesitation was brief. His ambition was too strong, his pride too great. He resolved to begin his work at once. He decided that his creation should be a complex organism, a man. But he also decided, for reasons of practicality, that his creation should be of a gigantic stature, some 8 feet in height and proportionally large. The logic was cold and chilling. The larger scale would make the minuteness of the parts less difficult to work with. He was thinking like an engineer, not like a moral philosopher. The sheer monstrous scale of his creation was decided by convenience. And so the final, terrible phase of his work began. He rented a solitary room. a workshop at the top of his apartment, separated from all other dwellings by a gallery and a staircase. Here, he could work in secret, undisturbed. He locked himself away from the world. This attic room became his universe, a universe of death and feverish creation. My workshop of filthy creation, he calls it. For nearly a year, he labored. His life became a waking nightmare. He neglected everything. His father's letters went unanswered. The memory of Elizabeth's gentle face faded. The seasons changed outside his window, but he paid them no mind. Summer months passed while I was thus engaged, heart and soul, in one pursuit, he says. Winter, spring, and summer passed away during my labors, but I did not watch the blossom or the expanding leaves. So deeply was I engrossed in my occupation. The man who had once found solace in the beauty of nature now saw nothing but the ghastly materials on his workbench. He describes his process with a shudder of retrospective horror. I collected my materials from the dissecting room and the slaughterhouse. He disturbed the sanctity of the grave, pursuing nature to her most secret hiding places. He dabbled in the filth of generation, his fingers sorting through bone and sinew. Yet even as he worked, he was blind to the grotesque reality of his task. He imagined his creation would be beautiful. His limbs were in proportion, he tells himself, and I had selected his features as beautiful. He rationalized the horror away, his mind so fixed on the glorious end result that it could not, or would not, see the monstrousness of the means. His health, already poor, deteriorated completely. He became a wraith, a ghost haunting his own life. My person had become emaciated with confinement, he repeats, and my limbs now trembled with the force of my exertions. My eyes were starting from their sockets in attending to the details of my employment. He worked with a frantic, nervous energy, starting at every sound, shunning the company of his fellow men as if he were a guilty criminal. He was, in his own words, a miserable spectacle. And yet, he could not stop. He was a slave to his creation. Finally, the work was nearing its end. The component parts were assembled. The gigantic form lay stretched out on his workbench. All that remained was to infuse the spark of life into the thing he had made. The moment arrived on a dreary night in November. Let us set the scene with him. The rain is pattering dismally against the window panes. His candle is nearly burnt out. The clock has just struck 1 in the morning. The massive, lifeless form lies before him, its features shrouded in the dim, flickering light. He has gathered his instruments. The culmination of 2 years of obsessive study, of a lifetime of ambition, is at hand. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, he applied his instruments. He connected the wires. He threw the switch. He infused the spark. I saw the dull, yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed, a hard, rattling breath. And then, a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. It was alive. His work was finished. He had succeeded. And in that single, terrible moment of success, the beauty of his dream vanished. The full, unmitigated horror of what he had done crashed down upon him. The reality of his creation was not the beautiful being he had imagined in his feverish obsession, but a catastrophe. He describes the being with a litany of revulsion. The skin was a sickly, translucent yellow, stretched so tautly that it barely covered the workings of the muscles and arteries beneath. The hair was a lustrous, flowing black. The teeth were a pearly white. These features, which he had so carefully selected for their beauty, now only served to create a more horrid contrast with the rest of it. The eyes were watery, almost the same dull yellow as the skin. The face was shriveled. The lips were straight and black. The dream was over. This was the reality. He had labored for nearly 2 years to create this wretch, this monster, filled with a breathless horror and disgust that his heart could not contain. He could not bear to remain in the same room. He rushed out, abandoning the creature on the instant of its birth. He fled to his own bedchamber, where he paced for hours, unable to compose his mind to sleep. Eventually, exhaustion overtook him. He threw himself onto his bed and fell into a tortured sleep. But his dreams offered no escape. They were a hideous reflection of his waking nightmare. He dreamed he saw Elizabeth walking the streets of Ingolstadt, looking healthy and vibrant. Delighted, he embraced her. But as he planted the first kiss on her lips, they took on the livid hue of death. Her features began to change. He thought he was holding the corpse of his dead mother in his arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and he could see the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. He awoke with a start, a cold dew on his forehead, his teeth chattering. And there, in the dim yellow light of the moon filtering through the window shutters, he saw it. The thing, the monster, his creation. It was standing by his bedside. Its watery eyes were fixed on him. Its jaws opened and it muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin, or what looked like a grin, wrinkled its cheeks. It stretched out one hand as if to detain him, but Victor did not stay to understand. He saw only a demon, a fiend. He bolted from the room. He rushed down the stairs and into the courtyard below, where he remained for the rest of the night, pacing back and forth in a torment of fear and regret. He listened intently, dreading every sound, imagining it was the approach of the demonic corpse to which he had so miserably given life. Dawn finally came, bleak and wet. He left the courtyard and began to walk the streets as if fleeing a phantom. He was a man who had achieved his life's greatest ambition, and his success had utterly and completely destroyed him. The pale student had finished his unhallowed work. His creation was alive, and he, its creator, was now its first and most terrified victim. We will leave him there in the cold light of a new day, a fugitive from his own triumph. The great act of creation is over. The long, dark story of its consequences is about to begin. Rest now in the quiet aftermath of this terrible birth. The new day does little to soothe his terror. The rain has stopped, but the streets are muddy and bleak. The town is beginning to stir. People open their shutters, merchants prepare their stalls. The mundane world is waking up, utterly oblivious to the drama that has unfolded in the attic room of a solitary student. For Victor, this normality is itself a kind of torture. It is a world he no longer feels a part of. He has transgressed a fundamental law of nature, and his punishment is this profound and terrifying alienation. He is a ghost at the feast of life, forever separated from his fellow men by the terrible secret he now carries. As he walks, his mind is a whirlwind of fear and self-reproach. How could he have been so blind? How could he have spent 2 years of his life dedicated to a project whose final result would be so abjectly hideous? He tortures himself with the memory of the creature's appearance. The dull, yellow, watery eyes, the shriveled skin, the straight, black lips. The dream of creating a beautiful, new species has died, replaced by the waking nightmare of having unleashed a demon upon the world. He feels a duty to pursue and destroy it, but he is paralyzed by a fear so profound that he can barely function. He continues his aimless wandering, a man running from his own shadow. It is in this state of desperate, agitated motion that he finds himself near the town's coaching inn. He is not there by design, but his frantic pacing has led him there. As he stands, trembling, he hears the sound of wheels on the cobblestones. A diligence, a public stagecoach, is just arriving from the direction of Geneva. He watches it with a kind of numb detachment until a familiar figure steps out. For a moment, Victor cannot process what he is seeing. The face is one from his other life, the life before the obsession, before the workshop, before the horror. It is his oldest and dearest friend, Henry Clerval. The sight of Clerval is a shock, a sudden jarring intrusion of warmth and light into his dark, constricted world. Henry, ever cheerful and full of life, catches sight of Victor and his face breaks into a wide smile of delight. "My dear Frankenstein," he exclaims, rushing forward to grasp his friend's hand. "How glad I am to see you. How fortunate that you should be here at the very moment of my arrival." Victor's reaction is not one of simple joy. It is a strange, manic, almost hysterical relief. He grasps Clerval's hand and laughs, a wild, unsettling sound. He feels a momentary, convulsive forgetting of his troubles. For a split second, he is the boy from Geneva again, reunited with his closest companion. "It was the first time during many months that I had felt the joy of friendship," he reflects. He begins to talk with a frantic, unnatural cheerfulness, asking about his father, his brothers, and his beloved Elizabeth. Clerval, though delighted to see him, cannot help but notice his friend's strange appearance. "You are thin and pale," he remarks with concern. "You look as if you have been watching for several nights." Victor brushes off the concern, his mind still racing. He insists on taking Clerval directly back to his apartment, his thoughts a chaotic jumble. On the one hand, he is overjoyed to see his friend. On the other, a cold dread is beginning to seep back into his heart. What if the monster is still there? What if Clerval sees it? The walk back to his lodgings is a torment. He talks incessantly, his laughter too loud, his gait too quick. He is trying to outrun the terror that is clawing at his mind. Clerval, ever the gentleman, is somewhat bewildered by this strange reception, but attributes it to the simple excitement of their reunion. As they approach the door to his building, Victor's anxiety reaches a fever pitch. He hesitates, his hand on the handle, his blood running cold. He asks Clerval to wait for a moment, and then, taking a deep breath, he throws open the door and rushes up the stairs to his rooms. He bursts into his apartment, his eyes darting into every corner. He searches the main room, then his bedchamber, his heart pounding. There is no one there. He throws open the door to his laboratory, his workshop of filthy creation. It is empty. The monster is gone. The relief is so immense, so absolute, that it is almost as painful as the fear that preceded it. He claps his hands together in a gesture of ecstatic gratitude and runs back down to Clerval, his face now beaming with a genuine, if still manic, joy. He seizes his friend's arm and leads him into the apartment, the very place that had been the scene of his damnation just hours before. But the human mind can only endure so much. The intense emotional swing from terror to relief is the final straw for Victor's frayed nerves. As he ushers Clerval into the room, he suddenly sees it again. Not the creature itself, but the phantom of it. He imagines the monster darting into the room behind them. He stumbles, and as Clerval catches him, Victor points to an empty corner and cries out, believing he sees the wretch seizing him. And then he collapses. The strain of the past 2 years, the obsessive work, the self-neglect, the moral horror, the terror, the guilt, all of it comes crashing down at once. He falls into a violent, convulsive fit. His mind gives way, and he descends into the merciful oblivion of a nervous fever. What follows is a long, dark winter of the soul. For several months, Victor lies in his bed, hovering between life and death. He is delirious, completely unaware of his surroundings. His conscious mind is gone, replaced by a fever dream landscape of horror. In his delirium, he raves, and his ravings are always of the same thing. He believes himself to be in a constant struggle with a fiend who is throttling him. He cries out, he pleads, he struggles against an invisible foe. He is living, over and over, the terror of that first night. And through all of it, Henry Clerval is there. Let us take a moment to consider the character of Henry Clerval, for it is in this dark chapter that his goodness shines most brightly. Clerval, who had arrived in Ingolstadt with dreams of beginning his own academic career, puts all of his own ambitions aside without a second thought. He becomes Victor's sole nurse and guardian. This is no small task. He is in a foreign city with a friend who is gravely ill and seemingly insane. He does not know the cause of this sudden breakdown, but his devotion is absolute. He nurses Victor with a tenderness and patience that Victor describes as being like that of a devoted mother. He sits by his bedside day and night. He manages his friend's affairs. Most importantly, he conceals the true, horrifying nature of Victor's illness from his family back in Geneva. He knows that the news of Victor's madness would devastate them, so in his letters home, he speaks only of a minor, lingering illness, reassuring them that Victor is in good hands and will soon recover. He bears the entire burden himself, protecting not only his friend, but his friend's entire family from the terrible truth. He is the embodiment of selfless, compassionate friendship. He is everything that Victor, in his obsessive selfishness, has ceased to be. The winter passes in this way, a long, slow blur of fever and care. And then, as the first signs of spring begin to appear outside the window, Victor's fever finally breaks. He awakens one morning as if from a long, terrible dream. He is weak, thin, and disoriented, but he is lucid. He sees Henry sitting by his bed, watching him with an expression of anxious affection. For the first time in months, Victor is aware of his friend's presence, and his heart overflows with gratitude. He takes Clerval's hand and thanks him, his voice weak but clear. Clerval is overjoyed. The long, dark vigil is over. His friend is saved. The recovery is slow but steady. As Victor regains his strength, he is slowly reintroduced to the world. He looks out his window and sees the new buds on the trees, the signs of life returning to the world. And as nature heals, so does he. He feels a sense of calm and a simple joy in being alive that he has not felt in years. The memory of his creation is still there, a dark stain on his soul, but for now it is a distant thing, a nightmare from which he has awakened. The very thought of natural philosophy, of chemistry, of his laboratory, now fills him with a visceral disgust. He cannot bear to even look at a chemical instrument. The field of study that was once his entire world is now a source of trauma. When he is well enough, Henry gives him a letter that has been waiting for him. It is from Elizabeth. The sight of her handwriting is a balm to his spirit, a tangible link to the world of love and domestic peace that he had so thoroughly abandoned. He opens it, and as he reads, the voice of his more than sister brings the world of Geneva flooding back into his consciousness. The letter is a beautiful portrait of their life at home, full of gentle news and loving concern. She chides him, affectionately, for his long silence, and expresses her worry over his illness. She then proceeds to give him all the news of the family. His father is well, though still grieving for his wife. His youngest brother, William, the darling of the family, is now a beautiful boy of 5 or 6, with sweet, laughing blue eyes and dimples. His other brother, Ernest, now 16, is no scholar. He wants to be a true Swiss and join the foreign service as a soldier, but the most detailed part of her letter concerns a young woman who has recently returned to their household. Her name is Justine Moritz. Elizabeth's account of Justine is a small, self-contained story of hardship and virtue, and it is worth our close attention. Justine, Elizabeth reminds him, was the 3rd child of a widow who lived in their neighborhood. Her father had been a kind man who had been fond of Justine, but he died when she was young. After his death, Justine's mother began to treat her cruelly. She seemed to dislike Justine intensely, for reasons no one could understand. Victor's mother, Caroline, ever the benevolent spirit, noticed the girl's unhappy situation and, when Justine was 12, convinced her mother to let her come and live in the Frankenstein household as a servant. Justine thrived under Caroline's care. She was not treated as a mere servant, but as a member of the family. She was clever, gentle, and remarkably affectionate. Elizabeth, in particular, grew to love her as a sister. When Caroline died, however, Justine's mother, perhaps feeling a pang of guilt, called her back home. But the reconciliation was short-lived. Her mother's strange moods and accusations returned, and after the deaths of her other 3 children, she fell into a deep religious melancholy, blaming herself and Justine for their deaths. She died soon after, and Justine, now an orphan, returned once more to the loving sanctuary of the Frankenstein home. Elizabeth praises Justine's character in the highest terms. She is clever, kind-hearted, and though she is a Roman Catholic in a Protestant household, she is not bigoted. She is a favorite of everyone, especially little William. The story of Justine is a story of resilience, of a good and gentle soul who has endured hardship and found a safe harbor. She is, like so many of the female characters in this story, a model of passive, virtuous suffering and quiet strength. The letter concludes with a plea for Victor to write back himself as soon as he is able, and more importantly, to come home. "Write, dearest Victor," she implores. "One line, one word will be a blessing to us. Come, dearest Victor, you alone can console your father. We all look forward to your return as a day of jubilee." The letter has a profound effect on Victor. It reawakens all his feelings of affection for his family. It fills him with a deep sense of shame and guilt for his long neglect. He immediately writes a reply, and his one desire now is to return to Geneva, to be enfolded once more in the loving embrace of his family. He has been lost, and now he wants to go home. As his health improves, he and Clerval begin to spend more time together, talking and reading. Victor, still repulsed by the sciences, finds a new intellectual passion in the company of his friend. Clerval has come to Ingolstadt to study Oriental languages, Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit. To please his friend and to find a field of study as far removed as possible from his former pursuits, Victor joins him. He finds a surprising solace in these ancient, poetic languages. They are the language of imagination, of story, of human culture, not the language of physical laws and forbidden secrets. It is a form of intellectual healing, a turning away from the dangerous world of material science toward the safer, more contemplative world of the humanities. His re-entry into university life is a slow and tentative process. He finally musters the courage to visit his professors. He goes to Monsieur Waldman, who greets him with the same gentle kindness as before. Then he goes to see Monsieur Kremper. The gruff professor, surprisingly, is overjoyed to see him, praising his incredible achievements and expressing his sorrow over Victor's long illness. The praise, however, is now like poison to Victor. It is a reminder of the work that he now views with utter horror. The sight of his chemical laboratory, which he has to dismantle before he can leave, fills him with a near physical sickness. His revulsion is so complete that he feels he has changed his very nature. "I was at that time," he says, "a creature of another Goth, a being of another order." The winter finally gives way to a glorious spring. Victor's health and spirits are almost completely restored. He and Clerval decide that before they begin their journey back to Geneva, they will take a 2-week walking tour of the Ingolstadt countryside. This excursion is a period of pure, unadulterated peace, a final sun-drenched moment of calm before the storm. For 2 weeks, they wander through the stunning Bavarian landscape. The world, which had been a grey, oppressive prison for Victor, is now vibrant with life and beauty. He feels, for the first time in years, a simple, uncomplicated joy. "A serene sky and verdant fields filled me with ecstasy," he recalls. "The peasant, with his cheerful face and hearty welcome, did not mock me. I felt as if I had been restored to life." He laughs with Clerval, a true, hearty laugh. They quote their favourite poets. They feel the simple, profound pleasure of being young and alive in a beautiful world. This walking tour is the final stage of his convalescence. It is the healing power of nature and friendship working in concert to restore a broken spirit. The memory of the monster fades into the background, becoming like a bad dream from which he has finally, fully awakened. He feels reborn, absolved. He believes he has escaped his past. He is ready to begin his life anew, to return to his family and his duties, to marry his beloved Elizabeth, and to live a life of peaceful, domestic virtue. And so, our section ends. Victor and Clerval have returned to Ingolstadt from their trip, their hearts full of joy and anticipation. The date for their journey home to Geneva is set. The arrangements are made. Victor is happy, healthier than he has been in years, and full of hope for the future. He has walked through the valley of the shadow of death and emerged, he believes, into the light. The sickness of his soul has been cured. The past is buried. All that remains is the happy journey home. We will leave him in this moment of fragile, illusory peace, on the very cusp of his return. Rest now, in this quiet interlude, this belief that the nightmare is over. This period, this spring in Ingolstadt, is a small, sunlit plateau in a life story dominated by dark valleys and terrifying peaks. It is a moment of peace so complete that it feels as though it could last forever. But it is a peace built on a foundation of denial, a fragile illusion maintained only by the silence of the monster he has unleashed. The past is not buried. It has simply walked away, and it is only a matter of time before its shadow falls upon him once more. The preparations for their departure are made with cheerful anticipation. Victor and Clerval are to travel together, a journey that promises to be a happy extension of their recent walking tour. The date is set. Victor's heart is light. He looks forward to seeing his father's kind face, to hearing his brother's laughter, and most of all, to being reunited with Elizabeth, the calming center of his world, the woman he is destined to marry. He imagines a future of quiet study, of civic duty, of family life, a life of simple, honorable virtue, the very opposite of the monstrous, solitary ambition that had so nearly destroyed him. But the world, it seems, is not yet ready for him to leave. The last of the winter snows are melting in the mountains, and the roads become impassable. Their journey must be postponed by a week, and then another. Victor feels a flicker of impatience, a longing to be home, but his newfound peace is strong enough to withstand this small delay. He spends the time in pleasant companionship with Clerval, reading, walking, and talking, savouring these last moments of their shared academic life. He is a man waiting happily on the threshold of his own future. And then, a letter arrives from home. It is a simple thing, a folded piece of paper, but as Victor takes it, a sudden cold premonition grips him. He sees his father's handwriting, but the seal is black. In that era, a black wax seal on a letter meant only one thing. It was an announcement of a death. The fragile peace of the past few months shatters in an instant. The world of light and hope collapses. Before he has even broken the seal, he knows that some new and terrible disaster has occurred. His mind, in a panic, flies to the most vulnerable members of his family. His father, his brothers, Elizabeth. Are they ill? Are they dead? He trembles, unable to open the letter, terrified of the words contained within. Clerval, seeing his friend's distress, asks what is wrong. Victor can only point to the black seal, his voice caught in his throat. Finally, with a shaking hand, he breaks the seal and reads his father's words. The letter is not long, but it contains a universe of grief. It is dated just a few days prior. It begins with a father's struggle to convey an unspeakable horror to his beloved son. "My dear Victor," his father writes, "what a terrible night is this. How can I find words to express my sorrow? William is dead. That sweet child, whose smiles delighted and warmed my heart, who was so gentle, yet so gay. Victor, he is murdered." The words strike Victor with the force of a physical blow. William, his youngest brother, the laughing, blue-eyed boy whom Elizabeth had described with such affection in her last letter. Murdered. The concept is so monstrous, so alien to the peaceful world of his family, that he can barely comprehend it. He reads on, his eyes flying across his father's shaky script. Alphonse Frankenstein proceeds to recount the terrible events. The family, he, Elizabeth, and his two sons, Ernest and William, had gone for an evening walk in Plain Palais, a beautiful public ground near Geneva. The evening was calm and pleasant. As it grew late, they prepared to return home. It was only then that they discovered that William and Ernest, who had run ahead to play a game of hide-and-seek, had become separated. Ernest returned, but William did not. A search began immediately. They called his name. They scoured the grounds. But he was gone. Elizabeth, in a state of terrible anxiety, suddenly remembered that the boy had been pestering her all day to let him wear a valuable miniature portrait of his mother, Caroline. She had finally relented, and he had been wearing it on a small chain around his neck. The dreadful thought occurred to them that he might have been lured away by a thief for the sake of this valuable locket. The search continued all night. It was a night of frantic, desperate hope. Victor's father, along with several servants, searched the woods and the shores of the lake with torches. Elizabeth remained at home in a state of unbearable suspense, while Ernest tried to comfort her. At 5 a.m, Alphonse, exhausted and despairing, was returning home when he saw something lying on the grass near a thicket of trees. It was the body of his son. The boy had not been shot or stabbed. There were marks on his neck, the livid fingerprints of his killer. He had been strangled. The locket, the miniature of his mother, was gone. The motive, it seemed, was robbery. "I will not attempt to describe what I then felt," his father writes, his grief palpable in every word. "I was transported with rage and despair." He carried the small, lifeless body home. The sight of her murdered child threw Elizabeth into a state of profound, self-reproachful grief. "Oh God, I have murdered my darling child," she cried, blaming herself for having allowed him to wear the locket. It is a grief, his father explains, from which she has not yet recovered. She wanders the house like a restless spirit, her joy extinguished. The entire household is plunged into the deepest mourning. "Come, dearest Victor," his father concludes. "You alone can console Elizabeth. She weeps incessantly and accuses herself unjustly as the cause of his death. Her words pierce my heart. We are all unhappy, but will not that be an additional motive for you, my son, to return and be our comforter? Your dear mother, alas, Victor, I now say thank God she did not live to witness the cruel, miserable death of her youngest darling." Victor reads the letter and then reads it again. The grief is immense, a crushing weight, but it is not a simple grief. It is something far more complex, far more terrible. As the initial shock subsides, a new and dreadful certainty rises in his mind, cold and sharp as ice. He knows who did this. He does not need proof. He does not need a confession. In the deepest chamber of his soul, he knows. The murderer is not some common thief from the city. The murderer is the fiend to whom he had given life. I, not in deed, but in effect, was the true murderer, he thinks, the words forming a silent scream in his mind. The thought is a torment beyond anything he has ever known. His family mourns the loss of a child. He mourns that loss, but he also bears the soul-crushing guilt of having created the instrument of that loss. His secret is no longer just a private horror. It is a horror that has reached out from his attic workshop and claimed the life of his innocent brother. He shows the letter to Clerval, whose kind heart is filled with sorrow and sympathy for his friend's loss. Clerval sees a grieving brother. He cannot see the tormented creator, the man who feels the full, crushing weight of divine responsibility. Victor immediately prepares to depart. There can be no more delays. He must go home, not as a comforter, but as a man bearing a terrible, secret guilt. He rushes ahead of Clerval, unable to bear the slow pace of a carriage, driven by a frantic need to be in Geneva, to be at the scene of the crime. The journey home is a long agony. The landscapes of his native country, which had so recently filled him with ecstasy, now seem to mock him with their beauty. The sublime peaks of the Alps, the placid blue of the lake. They are a paradise from which he is now eternally exiled. He feels like a different species of being, a creature tainted by a crime so monstrous that it separates him from the natural world and from all of human society. He travels with a feverish speed, but his mind travels faster, replaying the events, imagining the horror of his brother's last moments, feeling the strangling hands of his own creation around his own neck. He arrives at the gates of Geneva late in the evening. The city gates are closed for the night. He is forced to wait, to spend the night outside the city walls, in the very area where his brother was murdered. He decides to visit the spot. He takes a boat and crosses the lake to Plainpalais. The sky is dark, the air heavy, a storm is brewing in the mountains. As he stands on the ground where William's body was found, the storm breaks. It is not a gentle rain, but a violent, spectacular tempest. The thunder echoes from the peaks of the Salève, the Jura, and the Alps of Savoy. The lightning illuminates the night sky, a vast sheet of fire, revealing the dark, churning waters of the lake and the towering black form of Mont Blanc in the distance. This storm, he feels, is a fitting dirge for his funeral. It is a spectacle of sublime, untamable power, the very kind of power he had once sought to emulate. And as he stands there, mesmerized by the raw force of nature, a flash of lightning illuminates the trees just ahead of him. In that brief, brilliant flash, he sees it, a figure. It is moving with a speed that is not human, climbing the steep rock face of Mont Salève. The figure is distorted by the distance and the gloom, but its stature is unmistakable. It is gigantic, hideous. It is his creation. The sight banishes all doubt. A flash of lightning illuminated the object, he recalls, and discovered its shape plainly to me. Its gigantic stature and the deformity of its aspect, more hideous than belongs to humanity, instantly informed me that it was the wretch, the filthy demon to whom I had given life. The creature disappears into the darkness of the mountains. Victor is left standing in the rain, his heart a cold, hard knot in his chest. His grief is now mingled with a burning rage. The murderer of my brother was brought before me, he thinks. He knows, with an absolute and terrible certainty, that the creature he unleashed is a being of pure malevolence, a fiend who delights in carnage and misery. He makes a silent vow. He will find this demon. He will pursue it to the ends of the earth. His life now has a new and terrible purpose, vengeance. He considers his next move. Should he denounce the creature? Should he tell his story to the magistrates? He quickly dismisses the idea. The story is too fantastic, too insane. Who would believe him? They would think he was a madman. Who would credit a tale of laying my hands on a miserable wretch and giving him life? He asks himself. They would lock him away, and the monster would be free to continue its reign of terror. He realizes, with a sense of despair, that he is completely alone in his knowledge, trapped and rendered powerless by the sheer unbelievability of his own secret. The storm subsides. The gates of Geneva open with the dawn. Victor, weary and heartsick, finally makes his way to his family's home. The house, once a sanctuary of joy, is now a house of mourning. He is greeted by his brother Ernest, his face etched with sorrow. He then enters the room where his father and Elizabeth are waiting. The reunion is a painful one. His father's grief is stoic and heavy. Elizabeth's is sharp and full of a desperate energy. She greets Victor with a cry of, "Oh, my beloved cousin, you have come to us in our sorrow." Victor embraces them, his heart breaking under the weight of his duplicity. He feels like a hypocrite, accepting their comfort, sharing in their grief, all the while knowing that he is the ultimate cause of their suffering. It is Ernest who delivers the next, and in some ways the most terrible blow. "We have discovered the murderer," he tells Victor quietly. Victor's heart leaps. Could it be? Has his creature somehow been captured? But Ernest's next words plunge him into a new circle of hell. "It is Justine Moritz," Ernest says. Victor is stunned. He cannot believe what he is hearing. Justine? The gentle, kind-hearted girl whom Elizabeth had described with such love. The girl who had been like a sister to them, who had adored little William. It is impossible. It is a monstrous absurdity. "Justine Moritz, poor, poor girl, is she accused?" he cries out. "But it is wrongfully. Everyone knows that. No one believes it, surely, Ernest." But Ernest's face is grim. He explains the evidence. A servant, it seems, had found something in the pocket of the dress Justine had worn on the night of the murder. It was the locket, the miniature of Caroline Frankenstein, the very object for which William was presumed to have been killed. The logic of the situation is brutal and inescapable. Justine was out of the house for the entire night of the murder. She was seen by a market woman early the next morning, not far from the spot where the body was found. And now, the stolen object has been found in her possession. To the world, the case is open and shut. The evidence, though circumstantial, is damning. For Victor, this news is the final, exquisite turn of the screw. His torment has reached a new and unbearable dimension. His creation has not only murdered his brother, it has, with a devilish cunning, framed an innocent person for the crime. An innocent person who is a beloved member of his own family. The fiend has found a way to make Victor's family complicit in its own destruction. They will now seek justice by executing an innocent girl, compounding one tragedy with another. "My agony was unbearable," Victor recalls. He knows the truth. He alone holds the key to Justine's innocence. But he is trapped. To save her, he would have to tell his monstrous story, a story no one would believe. He would be trading her life for his own reputation as a sane man, a reputation that would be instantly destroyed. He tries to proclaim her innocence, but his protestations, lacking any explanation, sound like the wild ravings of a grief-stricken brother. Elizabeth, alone, seems to share his conviction in Justine's innocence, but even she cannot explain away the terrible evidence of the locket. And so our section ends. Victor is home, but home is no longer a sanctuary. It is a stage for an unfolding tragedy of his own making. The first shadow of his creation has fallen, claiming the life of his brother. Now, a second, even darker shadow looms, threatening to engulf the innocent Justine Moritz. Victor is locked in a prison of his own secret knowledge, a solitary witness to a truth so monstrous it cannot be spoken. The trial is set to begin, and Victor, the creator, the true cause of it all, can only watch in silent, impotent horror. Rest now, in this terrible quiet, as the machinery of a false justice begins to turn. Victor is trapped in a prison of his own making. The walls of this prison are not made of stone, but of the sheer, monstrous implausibility of his own secret. He possesses the truth, a truth that could exonerate an innocent woman. But to speak it would be to declare himself a madman. He is a man with a god's knowledge and a mortal's powerlessness. As the day of the trial approaches, the weight of this silence becomes a physical torment, a constant crushing pressure on his soul. The atmosphere in the house is thick with a grief that has fractured into different forms. Victor's father, Alphonse, a man of reason and a former syndic, is heartbroken but resigned. He has seen the evidence, the damning locket, and while he cannot reconcile it with the Justine he knows, he is accustomed to bowing to the grim logic of facts. He represents the sorrow of a world where terrible, inexplicable things happen, and the system, however flawed, must be trusted to run its course. Elizabeth, however, is a flame of righteous indignation in the gloom. Her grief for William is now overshadowed by her fierce, unwavering belief in Justine's innocence. She refuses to accept the evidence. She cannot and will not believe that the gentle, affectionate girl who loved William like a mother could be capable of such a monstrous act. "She is innocent, my cousin," she insists to Victor, her voice trembling with a passion that defies the cold facts. "I know it. I feel it. You would know it too if you had known her as I have," she argues with a desperate, loving logic. What motive could Justine have? The locket, a trinket compared to the love and security she enjoyed in their home. The idea is absurd. It is a dream, a hideous dream, from which they must awaken. Elizabeth's faith in Justine is absolute, a testament to her own pure heart and her profound understanding of human character. She sees the goodness in Justine, and she holds on to that truth as a drowning person holds onto a piece of driftwood. And Victor listens to this, his heart breaking. Elizabeth's passionate defense of Justine is a chorus to his own silent, screaming knowledge. Every word she speaks in Justine's favor is another turn of the knife in his own conscience. He wants to join her, to shout from the rooftops that Justine is innocent, that the true murderer is a demon of his own making. But he cannot. "My tale was not one to announce publicly," he reflects. Its astounding horror would be looked upon as madness by the vulgar. He is paralyzed. He considers the consequences. If he tells his story, they will not believe him. The creature will remain at large, free to commit more atrocities, while he, Victor, would be confined as a lunatic. His testimony would be dismissed and Justine would die anyway. This is his rationalization, a desperate calculation made in the throes of terror and guilt. He convinces himself that his silence is a form of strategic necessity, the only sane choice in an insane situation. But deep down, he knows it is also a form of cowardice. He is sacrificing Justine to protect himself from the social death of being branded a madman. And so he says nothing of substance. He echoes Elizabeth's belief in Justine's innocence, but his words are hollow, lacking the fire of true conviction because he cannot provide the reason why. He can only offer empty assurances, which sound like the desperate hopes of a grieving family member. To Elizabeth, he must seem strangely passive, his grief manifesting as a kind of helpless despair. She cannot know that his despair is not helpless, but born of a terrible secret power that he is too afraid to wield. The day of the trial arrives. It is a public spectacle. The courtroom is crowded with the citizens of Geneva, drawn by the morbid curiosity that attends such a horrific and sensational case. Victor and his family are present, their attendance a painful duty. For Victor, entering that courtroom is like entering his own personal inquisition. He is the true criminal, the secret author of this entire tragedy, and now he must sit in silence and watch as an innocent woman is tried for his crime. The proceedings begin. The tone is somber, formal, the machinery of justice grinding forward with a terrible and impersonal momentum. The prosecution lays out its case, and Victor listens as the story is woven, a net of circumstantial evidence that tightens around Justine with every word. First, there are the statements from the family members, establishing the time and place of William's disappearance. Then, the testimony of the market woman who saw Justine early on the morning after the murder, wandering in a confused state near the very spot where the body was later found. Justine, when questioned, could not give a clear account of where she had been all night. She claimed she had been searching for William and, hearing the city gates were shut, had spent the night in a barn. This, on its own, is plausible, but weak. Then comes the final, damning piece of evidence. A servant of the Frankenstein family takes the stand. She explains that a few days after the murder, she was helping Justine, who had been taken ill with grief and shock, to change her clothes. As she shook out the dress Justine had been wearing on that fateful night, something fell from the pocket. It was the locket, the miniature portrait of Caroline Frankenstein. A murmur runs through the courtroom. The object is presented. It is passed to the judges, to the jury. It is the physical proof, the tangible link between the accused and the crime. The motive, the prosecution argues, is now clear. A servant girl, tempted by a valuable piece of jewelry, had lured the boy away, murdered him, and taken it. Her subsequent confusion and illness were the signs of a guilty conscience. The story, from the outside, is coherent. It is logical. It is tragically believable. All eyes turn to Justine. She stands before the court, pale and trembling, but with an expression of dignified innocence. She is asked to give her defense. Her voice is low but clear, her words simple and direct. She tells the court of her deep affection for the Frankenstein family, of her particular love for William. She describes how she spent the evening searching for the lost boy. She admits that she cannot explain how the locket came to be in her pocket. "I believe that I have no enemy on earth," she says, her voice breaking slightly, "and none surely would have been so wicked as to destroy me wantonly. Did the monster who murdered my William place this ornament in my pocket?" Her defense is the simple, unadorned truth. And because it is the truth, it is ultimately unconvincing. She has no alibi. She has no explanation for the evidence. She can only appeal to her own good character and protest her innocence. In the face of the locket, her words seem feeble, the desperate pleading of a guilty person. The initial sympathy of the crowd begins to curdle, replaced by a hardening conviction of her guilt. It is at this moment that Elizabeth, unable to bear the injustice any longer, rises to her feet. Overcoming her natural timidity and the strict decorum of the court, she asks to speak. Her voice, though trembling, rings with a clarity and passion that commands the attention of the entire room. She speaks not of evidence, but of character. She tells the court of Justine's life, of her kindness, her gentleness, her unwavering devotion to their family. She recounts Justine's selfless nursing of the late Caroline Frankenstein. She speaks of Justine's patient, loving care for William. "I am confident," Elizabeth declares, her eyes flashing with conviction, "that she would have sacrificed her life for the individual whom she is now accused of having murdered." She stakes her own reputation, her own credibility on Justine's innocence. It is a heroic act of friendship, a desperate appeal to the heart against the cold logic of circumstantial evidence. Victor watches, his soul torn between admiration for Elizabeth's courage and despair at his own silence. For a moment, it seems as if her passionate testimony might turn the tide, but the effect is tragically, perversely, the opposite. Instead of convincing the court of Justine's innocence, Elizabeth's speech only hardens their opinion of Justine's guilt. If this girl could so completely deceive someone as good and noble as Elizabeth Frankenstein, then her wickedness must be truly profound. Her gentle demeanor is now reinterpreted as a mask of monstrous hypocrisy. Elizabeth's testimony, intended to save her friend, has instead sealed her fate. It has painted a picture of a villainess so cunning that she could live for years in the heart of a loving family, all the while harboring a murderous, thieving nature. The trial concludes. The judges retire to deliberate. The verdict is a formality. Justine Moritz is found guilty of the murder of William Frankenstein. The sentence is death, to be carried out the following day. The words fall upon the courtroom like a death knell. Victor feels a despair so profound it borders on madness. The tortures of the accused did not equal mine, he reflects. She was sustained by innocence, but the fangs of remorse tore my bosom and would not forgo their hold. He sees himself as the true author of this entire grotesque spectacle. He has murdered two innocent beings, William by the hand of his creation and Justine by the hand of human law. The family returns to their home, a place now so thoroughly tainted by death and injustice that it offers no comfort. The next day is a long, agonizing wait. Victor is tormented by the thought of Justine's final hours, of her fear, of her unjust condemnation. He and Elizabeth resolve that they must see her one last time. They obtain permission to visit her in her prison cell that evening. The scene in the dungeon is one of quiet, heartbreaking sorrow. The room is cold, damp, lit by a single, flickering lamp. Justine is there, chained, but when she sees Elizabeth and Victor, a faint, sad smile touches her lips. Her first thought is not for herself. "I did not," she says to Elizabeth. "I did not confess." She is afraid that they have heard a rumor that she has admitted her guilt. Elizabeth reassures her, weeping, that she has never, for a moment, doubted her innocence. Justine's composure breaks. She weeps in Elizabeth's arms, not for her impending death, but for the simple, profound relief of being believed. "But I have confessed," she sobs, and the words hang in the air, a shocking contradiction. Victor and Elizabeth look at her, confused. Justine proceeds to explain what has happened. After the verdict, she had been visited in her cell by her confessor, a priest. This man, instead of offering comfort, had engaged in a campaign of psychological warfare. He had threatened her with the horrors of hell, with excommunication, with eternal damnation if she did not confess her sin. He had browbeaten her, argued with her, and harassed her for hours, until her spirit, already broken by grief, fear, and the injustice of her trial, finally gave way. In a state of utter confusion and terror, she began to doubt her own reality. "I almost began to think that I was the monster that he said I was," she whispers. Worn down, exhausted, and desperate for some kind of peace, even the peace of submission, she had finally yielded. She had confessed to a crime she did not commit, hoping to appease the priest and make her peace with God, a God who now seemed to demand a lie as the price of salvation. Victor listens to this, and his torment reaches its apex. This is the final, cruel masterpiece of his creature's work. The monster has not only murdered and framed, it has used the very institutions of human society, law and religion, to crush the soul of an innocent woman before taking her life. He sees with hideous clarity how the monster's physical violence has set in motion a chain reaction of social and psychological violence that is, in its own way, even more monstrous. I, the true murderer, felt the never-dying worm alive in my bosom, Victor thinks, as he stands there, a silent witness to Justine's final agony. He bites his lip until the blood comes, restraining the urge to fall at her feet and confess everything. But he remains silent. The habit of fear is too strong. He is a spectator at his own damnation. The visit comes to an end. The goodbyes are a blur of tears and choked words. Victor and Elizabeth leave Justine to her fate. They have offered her the small, inadequate comfort of their belief, but they cannot save her. The next morning, Justine Moritz is executed. The event itself happens offstage. Victor does not witness it. He hides, he runs, he tries to escape the knowledge of what is happening, but there is no escape. The fact of it settles over him, a permanent, indelible stain. He is now, in his own mind, responsible for 2 deaths. He is a murderer, twice over. Elizabeth's grief is transformed into a bitter disillusionment with the world. When I reflect on the miserable death of Justine, I no longer see the world and its works as they before appeared to me, she tells Victor. The world is no longer a place of beauty and justice, but one of bloodshed and hellish mischief. Her innocence has been shattered, replaced by a sad, cynical wisdom. For Victor, there is no such intellectual buffer. There is only guilt, pure and absolute. The memory of his happy childhood, of his loving family, of his own former innocence, is now a source of unending torture. Every beautiful scene is a reminder of the paradise he has single-handedly destroyed. The blood of William and Justine was on my hands, he says, and all was turned to added cruelty. The second shadow has fallen. The mockery of justice is complete. Victor Frankenstein is no longer a brilliant student or a grieving brother. He is a haunted man, a soul shipwrecked on an ocean of guilt. He is utterly and completely alone, carrying a burden that is slowly, methodically, destroying him from the inside out. There is no peace to be found in his home, no solace in the faces of his loved ones. There is only the gnawing, never-dying worm of remorse, and the dawning, terrifying realization that the creature's work may not yet be finished. We will leave him here, in the ruins of his former life, contemplating the abyss that has opened up before him. Rest now, in the heavy silence that follows an unjust death. The days that follow are a grey, monotonous landscape of despair. The Frankenstein family, once a vibrant constellation of love and happiness, is now a scattered collection of grieving individuals, each locked in their own private sorrow. Victor's father, Alphonse, bears his grief with a stoic, weary dignity, but the loss of his youngest son and the unjust death of their beloved ward have aged him terribly. His health begins to fail, the light in his eyes dimmed by a sorrow that has no remedy. Elizabeth is perhaps the most changed. The vibrant, joyful spirit that had once illuminated their home is gone, replaced by a deep and settled melancholy. Her faith in the goodness of the world has been shattered. The world, she tells Victor one day, her voice devoid of its former music. was to me a secret which I desired to discover. To her, it was a vacancy which she sought to people with imaginations of her own. But now, that vacancy is filled with the spectres of William and Justine. She no longer sees humanity as inherently good, but as a species capable of vice and injustice. She looks upon her fellow men with a new and sorrowful suspicion. She is still kind, still gentle, but her kindness is now tinged with a profound sadness, the wisdom of a soul that has looked upon the face of human darkness and cannot unsee it. And Victor is in a hell of his own unique design. He is a ghost in his own family. He walks among them, he speaks to them, he participates in the hollow rituals of their shared mourning, but he is utterly, completely alone. Their grief, pure and terrible as it is a grief he cannot truly share. They mourn the victims of a terrible crime. He mourns them too, but his grief is hopelessly entangled with the soul-shredding knowledge that he is the crime's ultimate author. Every tear they shed is a fresh accusation against him. Every word of comfort they offer feels like a hot coal pressed against his conscience. He is consumed by remorse. It is not a passing feeling, but a constant living presence within him. He describes it as a never-dying worm, a vampire clinging to his heart, sucking the life from him. He shuns all human contact. The sight of a happy face, the sound of laughter, the simple, everyday business of life, all of it is a torment to him. He feels he has no right to participate in the world of the living. I was encompassed by a cloud which no beneficial influence could penetrate, he says. His nights are sleepless, filled with waking nightmares. His days are spent in aimless wandering, seeking a solitude that mirrors the desolation of his soul. He is haunted by the image of his creation. He imagines the fiend at large in the world, delighting in its evil, perhaps even now preparing some new atrocity. The weight of this responsibility, of the evil he has unleashed, is crushing. More than once he contemplates ending his own life. He rows his boat out onto the calm, deep waters of Lake Geneva and considers plunging into its cool, silent depths. The thought of oblivion is a seductive one. To simply cease to be, to extinguish the burning torment of his mind, seems like the only possible relief. He lingers on the idea, imagining the peace of a watery grave. But two things hold him back. The first is the thought of the immense, additional pain his death would inflict upon his already devastated family, particularly upon Elizabeth and his father. He cannot bring himself to be the cause of yet more sorrow for them. The second and more powerful restraint is the thought of the monster. If he were to die, the creature would be left entirely unchecked, free to wreak whatever havoc it desired upon the world. He feels a grim, binding duty to the very being he so loathes. I was tempted to plunge into the silent lake, that the waters might close over me and my calamities forever, he reflects. But I was restrained by the thought of the fiend I had left loose upon the earth. He realizes, with a chilling sense of cosmic irony, that he must live, if only to one day destroy the life he so recklessly created. He is bound to his monster, a prisoner tethered to his jailer by a chain of shared existence. Seeing the depth of Victor's despair, his father tries to intervene. Victor Frankenstein, a man of practical benevolence, believes that a change of scenery might offer some relief. He proposes that the family move for a time to their country house at Belle Rive, on the eastern shore of the lake. The house is in a beautiful, secluded spot, surrounded by meadows and vineyards, with a view of the lake and the distant mountains. It had always been a place of happiness for them, a sanctuary for summer holidays. Victor agrees, though he has no hope that a change of place can cure a sickness of the soul. The family relocates. The house is as beautiful as he remembers. The landscape is serene. But nature, which had once been his greatest solace, now offers him no comfort. He looks upon the placid lake, and it seems to mock his inner turmoil. He sees the majestic, snow-capped peak of Mont Blanc in the distance, and its sublime, eternal beauty only serves to highlight his own fleeting, miserable existence. The calm and heavenly scene, he says, restored me only by unjust contrary. The beauty of the world makes his own internal ugliness feel all the more acute. He continues his solitary wanderings. He sails on the lake for hours, often waiting until nightfall, when the moon casts a silvery path on the water and the mountains are just dark, silent shapes against the sky, he finds a strange, melancholy comfort in the darkness and the silence. It is a world that seems to match his own internal state. During a period of calm, windless weather, he spends an entire night adrift on the lake, his boat a tiny speck in the immense, quiet darkness. He thinks of the past, of his golden childhood, of the love and promise that had once filled his life. These memories are not a comfort, they are a form of self-torture, a constant reminder of the paradise he has willfully destroyed. I was a blasted tree, he thinks. The bolt has entered my soul, and I felt then that I should survive to exhibit what I shall be in my misery. His family watches his decline with helpless concern. Elizabeth, in particular, tries to draw him out of his shell. She walks with him, talks to him, her presence a gentle, persistent plea for him to share his burden. She knows that his grief for William is not the only thing tormenting him. She senses a deeper, darker secret. She mistakes his all-consuming guilt for a different kind of secret. One day, she gently suggests that perhaps he is in love with another woman and that his impending marriage to her, Elizabeth, is the cause of his misery. She tells him that his happiness is her only desire and that if their union is a source of pain for him, she will release him from it. Her generosity is another stab to his heart. He reassures her with a desperate sincerity that she is the source of all his potential for future happiness. He tells her that he has a terrible secret, one that he cannot yet reveal, but that once it is told, it will either destroy them completely or allow them to be united in a peace they cannot now imagine. It is a cryptic, frightening promise, and it does little to comfort her, but it is the most he can offer. The secret remains locked within him. As the weeks wear on, his condition worsens. The need for a more profound escape becomes overwhelming. He feels he must get away, not just from the house at Belrive, but from his family, from all human society. He needs a landscape as wild and tumultuous as his own soul. He announces his intention to make a journey to the valley of Chamonix, a remote and dramatic region in the heart of the Alps. His father consents, hoping that the grandeur of the mountains might have a restorative effect, that the sublime majesty of nature might reawaken his son's spirit. Victor sets off alone. The journey itself is a kind of pilgrimage into the sublime. He travels on horseback, his path taking him up into the mountains. As he ascends, the landscape changes. The gentle, pastoral beauty of the Geneva Valley gives way to a wilder, more awesome scenery. He sees the river Arve, a turbulent, rushing torrent of water carving its way through the ravines. He hears the distant thunder of avalanches, a reminder of the constant, untamable power of the mountains. The sheer scale and power of the landscape have a strange, paradoxical effect on him. On the one hand, they dwarf him, making his own human concerns seem small and insignificant. On the other hand, their wildness, their chaotic energy, seems to mirror and validate the storm within his own soul. For the first time since the death of William, he feels a flicker of something other than despair. It is not joy, but a kind of solemn melancholy awe. These sublime and magnificent scenes, he says, afforded me the greatest consolation that I was capable of receiving. They did not remove my grief, but they subdued and tranquilized it. He arrives in the village of Chamonix. The weather is poor, and for a day he is confined to his inn by incessant rain. The confinement brings his despair rushing back, but the next morning the clouds have lifted. The sky is clear. He looks out his window and sees the colossal white form of Mont Blanc, its peak piercing the blue sky. The sight fills him with a sudden, irresistible urge to ascend, to climb higher, to lose himself in the pure, cold, silent world of the high peaks. He resolves to make an excursion to the summit of Montanvert, a mountain that offers a view of the famous Mer de Glace, the Sea of Ice. He hires a guide and a mule, but his restless spirit cannot bear their slow pace. He soon leaves them behind and continues his ascent on foot, leaping over crevasses and scrambling up steep rock faces with a reckless, almost suicidal energy. The physical exertion is a relief, a way to exhaust the frantic, nervous energy that plagues him. The air grows colder, purer. The world of men, of towns and villages falls away beneath him. After several hours of difficult climbing, He reaches the summit. The view that spreads out before him is one of the most magnificent and desolate on Earth. Below him lies the Mer de Glace, a vast, frozen river of ice that winds its way through the valley. It is not a smooth, placid surface, but a chaotic, undulating sea of ice waves, full of deep, blue-green crevasses and jagged pinnacles. The silence is profound, broken only by the distant cracking of the ice and the cry of an eagle. The scene is one of absolute, sublime desolation. It is a world without life, a world of pure, elemental forces. And in this place, Victor finds a moment of peace. He sits on a rock, looking out over the frozen sea, and his mind, for the first time, grows calm. My heart, which was before sorrowful, now swelled with something like joy, he recalls. He feels a sense of release from his human frailties. He addresses the spirits of the mountain, the wandering spirits of the air. If you have any intercourse with the souls of men, he cries out, allow me a little happiness, or take me as your companion away from the joys of life. It is a prayer to the vast, impersonal forces of nature, a plea for either peace or oblivion. It is in this precise moment of fragile, hard-won tranquility that his prayer is answered, but in the most hideous way imaginable. He raises his eyes and sees a figure far off on the ice advancing towards him with a speed that is utterly inhuman. He watches, his blood turning to ice in his veins. The figure bounds over the crevasses and leaps up the icy ridges with a superhuman agility. As it draws nearer, its form becomes clear. The stature is gigantic. The shape is a grotesque parody of the human. There is no mistaking it. It is his creature. It is the fiend. The brief moment of peace is annihilated, replaced by a surge of furious, burning rage. All his guilt, all his sorrow, all his fear coalesces into a single, white-hot point of hatred. This is the being that has destroyed his life, murdered his brother, and condemned an innocent woman. This is the source of all his misery. "Devil!" he screams, his voice echoing in the vast silence. "Do you dare approach me? And do not you fear the fierce vengeance of my arm wreaked on your miserable head? Begone, vile insect, or rather stay, that I may trample you to dust." He runs towards the creature, his intent to engage in a mortal struggle, a fight to the death on this desolate sea of ice. But the creature, with its superior strength, easily evades him. It stops just a few feet away, and Victor, for the first time since that terrible night in his apartment, finds himself face to face with his creation. The creature's appearance is as horrifying as he remembers, but its demeanor is not what he expects. It does not seem aggressive or menacing. Its face, though hideous, bears an expression of profound suffering, a mixture of anguish and a kind of grim resolution. And then it speaks. Its voice is not a monstrous growl, but a deep, articulate, and strangely eloquent sound. "I expected this reception," the creature says calmly. "All men hate the wretched. How then must I be hated, who am miserable beyond all living things? Yet you, my creator, detest and spurn me, your creature, to whom you are bound by ties only dissoluble by the annihilation of one of us. You purpose to kill me. How dare you sport thus with life?" Victor is momentarily stunned by its eloquence, but his rage quickly returns. He curses it, calling it a devil, a fiend, the murderer of his kin. He commands it to be silent, but the creature is not to be silenced. It fixes its watery yellow eyes on Victor and continues, its voice filled with a powerful, sorrowful logic. "I am thy creature," it says. "I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel, whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. Everywhere I see bliss, from which I alone am irrevocably excluded. I was benevolent and good. Misery made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous." The creature's words are a bombshell. It claims to have once been good. It claims its evil is a product of its misery, a misery that Victor, its creator, has inflicted upon it. It does not ask for forgiveness. It asks for justice. It demands a hearing. It wants to tell its story. Victor is filled with a mixture of loathing and a strange, unwilling curiosity. He refuses, ordering the creature to be gone, but the creature is persistent. It makes a powerful, simple demand that cuts to the very heart of their relationship. "Listen to me," it says. "Listen to my tale. Hear me before you condemn me. On your compliance depends the fate of thousands. Have I not suffered enough that you seek to increase my misery? Life, though it may only be an accumulation of anguish, is dear to me, and I will defend it, but I will not be trifled with. I am thy creature. Grant me this one request." The creature promises that after Victor has heard its story, he can then decide its fate. It suggests they retreat to a small hut on the mountain, a shelter from the cold, where it can make its case. Victor hesitates, torn between his visceral hatred and a dawning, terrible sense of responsibility. What has this creature experienced? What has it seen? What has turned it into a murderer? For the first time, he considers the possibility that this being has a perspective, a history, a reason for its actions. And so, moved by a curiosity he cannot deny and a glimmer of the duty he has so long ignored, he makes a decision. He will listen. He agrees to follow the creature to the hut. The roles are, for a moment, reversed. The creator is now following his creation, the master led by the slave. We will end our section here, in this moment of tense, unwilling truce. Victor Frankenstein has followed his demon into a hut of ice, high on a desolate mountain. The rage is still there, but it is now joined by a flicker of something else, a terrible, compelling need to understand. The creature is about to speak, to give an account of its own existence, and Victor, its creator and its sworn enemy, is about to become its first and only audience. Rest now in this cold, high-altitude silence as the monster prepares to tell its tale. The air is thick with a tension that is almost a physical presence. This is not a meeting of friends, nor even of simple enemies. It is a confrontation of creator and created, of a god and his flawed, abandoned Adam. And now the Adam is about to speak. For the first time, the narrative voice of our story will belong to the monster. He will tell his own story, an account of his life from the very moment Victor fled from him in that attic room in Ingolstadt. Victor has agreed to listen, and so shall we. Let us quiet our minds and allow this new, strange voice to guide us. The creature begins his tale. His voice is deep and articulate, a stark contrast to his grotesque appearance. "It is with considerable difficulty," he begins, "that I remember the original era of my being. All the events of that period appear confused and indistinct." He speaks of his birth not as a moment of glorious awakening, but as a state of profound, overwhelming sensory confusion. Imagine it, to be born fully grown, with a nervous system capable of immense sensation, but with a mind that is a complete and utter blank. He describes the experience of light, not as a gentle dawning, but as a painful, oppressive force that pressed upon his nerves. He was forced to shut his eyes. Then came the sensation of darkness, which was also painful and strange. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to distinguish between the different sensations bombarding him. He learned to differentiate light from dark, sound from silence, heat from cold. He describes his first clumsy movements, his first attempts to walk. He was a being of immense strength, yet he was as helpless as a newborn infant. He felt the pangs of hunger and thirst, and, through instinct, found a stream to drink from and berries to eat. He was a creature of pure, unaccommodated sensation, an animal learning to exist in a world for which he had no context, no language, no understanding. He recalls the night he first saw the moon. He was filled with a strange sense of pleasure and wonder. He describes his discovery of fire, left behind by some wandering beggars. He thrusts his hand into the hot embers and cries out in pain, his first lesson in the dual nature of things, that the same force that provides warmth and light can also cause pain and destruction. He learns to tend the fire, to cook his food. He is a primitive man, a solitary being discovering the fundamental principles of survival through trial and error. His first encounters with human beings are uniformly disastrous. He wanders into a shepherd's hut, and the man shrieks in terror and flees. He enters a village, and the reaction is one of universal horror. Children scream, women faint. The men attack him, pelting him with stones and driving him out of the village with a violence born of pure, unthinking fear. This is his first taste of human society. It is a lesson in rejection. He does not yet understand why they hate him. He has done them no harm. He is bewildered, hurt, and terrified. I had hardly placed my foot within the door, he laments, before the children shrieked, and one of the women fainted. The whole village was roused. Some fled, some attacked me, until, grievously bruised by stones and many other kinds of missile weapons, I escaped to the open country and fearfully took refuge in a low hovel, quite bare, and making a wretched appearance after the palaces I had beheld in the village. This hovel becomes his sanctuary and his school. It is a small, dilapidated lean-to built against the back wall of a cottage. It is dark and cramped, but it offers him shelter from the elements and, more importantly, from the terrifying gaze of human beings. He discovers a small, imperceptible crack in the wall of the cottage, a tiny chink through which he can peer into the lives of the people who live there. And it is here, in secret, that his true education begins. He becomes a voyeur, a silent, invisible observer of a human family. For months, he does nothing but watch them. The cottage is inhabited by 3 people. There is an old blind man, whose face is gentle and benevolent. There is a young woman, whose expression is one of sweet, melancholy beauty. And there is a young man, who seems to carry a heavy sadness of his own. The creature watches their every move, listens to their every word, and through them, he begins to learn what it means to be human. At first, he is confused by their behavior. He sees them weep, and he feels a sympathetic pang of sorrow, though he does not understand its cause. He sees them interacting with a tenderness and affection that fills him with a strange sense of wonder. He notices that they often seem unhappy, and he soon discovers the reason. They are very poor. They have little to eat. The young people often go without food themselves, giving their small portions to the old man. This observation sparks the first stirring of a moral sentiment in the creature's breast. Moved by their poverty and their selfless love for one another, he feels a pang of guilt for the small amounts of their food he has been stealing at night. He resolves to stop. Not only that, he begins to help them in secret. During the night, while they are sleeping, he takes the young man's tools and gathers wood for them, leaving a large pile by their door each morning. He finds a secret joy in this anonymous service. I discovered, he says, one of the causes of the uneasiness of this amiable family. It was poverty, and they suffered that evil in a very distressing degree. Their nourishment consisted entirely of the vegetables of their garden and the milk of one cow. I often took his tools and brought home firing sufficient for the consumption of several days. This is his first act of benevolence, his first experience of the pleasure of doing good for others. He also begins to learn language. He listens intently to their conversations. He learns the names for things: fire, milk, bread, wood. He learns the names of the cottagers themselves. The old man is called Father, the young man is Felix, and the young woman is Agatha. He learns words for emotions: good, dearest, unhappy. The process is slow and laborious, but his mind is powerful and eager. He practices the sounds at night, alone in his hovel. He is a student in a secret one-man classroom. He learns about the beauty of music when he hears Agatha play her guitar and sing. The sounds produce in him an ecstasy of delight. He learns about the written word when he sees Felix reading aloud to his father. He longs to understand these strange black marks on the paper, to unlock the secrets they contain. His admiration for the cottagers grows into a deep and abiding love. He sees them as superior beings, models of virtue and grace. He longs to be a part of their world, to reveal himself to them, and to be accepted into their circle of love. But he is held back by the memory of his first encounters with humanity. He has become acutely aware of his own monstrous appearance. He has caught his reflection in a pool of water and has been filled with a bitter, despairing self-loathing. He understands now why people flee from him. I had admired the perfect forms of my cottagers, he laments, their grace, beauty, and delicate complexions. But how was I terrified when I viewed myself in a transparent pool? At first I started back, unable to believe that it was indeed I who was reflected in the mirror. And when I became fully convinced that I was in reality the monster that I am, I was filled with the bitterest sensations of despondence and mortification. He resolves that he will not show himself to them until he has mastered their language, until he can speak to them and, through his words, convince them of his gentle nature and his good intentions. He dreams of the moment when he will win their love and acceptance. A moment that will, he believes, end his agonizing loneliness. His education takes a quantum leap forward with the arrival of a new person at the cottage. One day, a beautiful, dark-haired woman dressed in exotic clothing arrives on horseback. She does not speak their language. Her name is Safi, and she has come for Felix. The young man is overjoyed to see her, his deep melancholy instantly vanishing, replaced by a radiant happiness. Safia's arrival is a boon not only for Felix, but for the creature as well. As Felix begins to teach Safi how to speak and read their language, the creature becomes their silent, secret pupil. Felix uses a book called Ruins of Empires by Volney. As he reads aloud to Safi, explaining the text, the creature listens from his hovel and receives a crash course in human history and society. This is a pivotal moment in his intellectual development. He learns about the rise and fall of ancient empires, about the different cultures and religions of the world. He learns about the complexities of human society, the divisions of wealth and poverty, of class and status, of nobility and servitude. He learns about the astonishing capacity of human beings for both sublime virtue and an almost incomprehensible vice. He is baffled by what he learns. Was man indeed at once so powerful, so virtuous and magnificent, yet so vicious and base, he wonders. I heard of the division of property, of immense wealth and squalid poverty, of rank, descent and noble blood. I could not understand them. He learns of war, of murder, of terrible crimes. And as he learns these things, he begins to apply them to his own situation. He has no money, no property, no friends. He is a wretch, an outcast, a being who does not belong to any class or category of human society. The more he learns about the world, the more he understands his own profound and absolute alienation from it. At the same time, Felix's lessons provide the creature with a deeper understanding of the de Lacy family's own story. He learns why they are living in this poor cottage, exiled from their native France. The old man, de Lacy, was once a wealthy and respected citizen of Paris. His son, Felix, had fallen in love with Safi, who is the daughter of a wealthy Turkish merchant. Safia's father had been unjustly imprisoned by the French government. Felix, moved by the injustice and his love for Safi, had helped the Turk to escape from prison. The plot was discovered. The French government, unable to recapture the Turk, seized his benefactors instead. The blind de Lacy and his daughter Agatha were thrown into prison. They were stripped of their wealth and condemned to perpetual exile. They were forced to flee to this humble cottage in Germany. This is the source of their poverty and their sadness. Felix had arranged for Safi to join him, and her arrival is the fulfillment of a long-held, desperate hope. The family's story is one of noble self-sacrifice, of love, and of cruel injustice at the hands of a powerful state. The creature's admiration for the de Lacys deepens. They are not just good people. They are martyrs to their own virtue. They have suffered for doing what is right. This only intensifies his desire to be accepted by them. One day, while foraging in the nearby woods, the creature makes another momentous discovery. He finds a lost leather portmanteau containing several books. It is a treasure trove. He takes the books back to his hovel and, with his newfound literacy, begins to read. The books are a strange and powerful collection. A volume of Plutarch's Lives, detailing the histories of the great men of antiquity. Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther, a novel of intense romantic melancholy. And John Milton's Paradise Lost, the epic poem about the creation of Adam and the fall of Satan. These three books become the foundation of his moral and philosophical education. They have a profound and transformative effect on him. From Plutarch's Lives, he learns about public virtue, about heroism, about the great deeds of lawmakers and leaders. He is elevated by these stories of human greatness, but they also serve to highlight his own solitary, ignoble existence. He is no citizen of a great republic. He is a monster hiding in a hovel. The Sorrows of Young Werther introduces him to the inner world of human emotion. He reads of love, of despair, of a sensitive soul overwhelmed by the world. He weeps with Werther. He feels his sorrows as if they were his own. The book teaches him about melancholy, about suicide, about the deep, private agonies of the heart. It gives him a language for the despair that is beginning to consume him. but it is Paradise Lost that has the most profound and devastating impact. He reads it not as a work of fiction, but as a true history. And in its pages, he finds a story that seems to be a direct reflection of his own. He sees the story of a powerful, benevolent God creating his perfect creature, Adam. He reads of Adam, cherished and protected, able to converse with his creator and with angels, and he feels a sense of profound, bitter envy. Like Adam, he says, I was apparently united by no link to any other being in existence, but his state was far different from mine in every other respect. He had come forth from the hands of God a perfect creature, happy and prosperous, guarded by the especial care of his creator, but I was wretched, helpless, and alone. He identifies with Adam in his loneliness, but he sees that he has been given none of Adam's blessings. Then, as he reads on, he finds another figure in the story with whom he identifies even more strongly: Satan. He reads of Satan, once a beautiful angel, cast out from heaven by his creator, transformed into a bitter, vengeful fiend. Like Satan, he has seen the happiness of others and has felt the bitter gall of envy. He sympathizes with Satan's rage, with his sense of cosmic injustice. The book forces him to ask the most terrible question of all: what am I? Am I Adam, or am I the fallen angel? His sense of identity is further complicated by another discovery. In the pocket of the coat he had taken from Victor's laboratory on the night of his creation, he finds a sheaf of papers. They are Victor's journal, a detailed account of the 4 months leading up to his creation. The creature reads it, and the words he reads are a final, soul-destroying revelation. He reads of Victor's obsessive ambition, of his disgust at the materials he is working with. He reads of his hopes and then of his horror and revulsion upon seeing his creation come to life. He learns in his creator's own words of his own hideousness, of the loathing and contempt that Victor felt for him from the very first moment of his existence. "Hateful day when I received life," he cries out in his narrative to Victor. "Accursed creator, why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? God, in pity, made man beautiful and alluring after his own image, but my form is a filthy type of yours, more horrid even from the very resemblance. Satan had his companions, fellow devils, to admire and encourage him, but I am solitary and abhorred." This is the final, brutal truth. He is not Adam. He is not even Satan. He is something else entirely, a being created only to be abandoned, a monster loathed by his own God. The education of the monster is now complete. He has learned language, history, and philosophy. He has learned about human society, about love, and about virtue. But the most important lesson he has learned is the lesson of his own monstrosity. He knows who he is, and he knows that he is utterly, hopelessly alone. His one remaining hope, the one flickering flame in the vast darkness of his existence, is the DeLacy family. He clings to the dream that their virtue, their goodness, will be enough to overcome his hideousness. He will stake his entire future on one desperate attempt to win their acceptance. We will end our section here, with the creature poised on the brink of this fateful encounter. He has completed his long, secret apprenticeship in what it means to be human. He has tasted the fruits of the tree of knowledge, and they have brought him not wisdom, but an agony of self-awareness. He is a being of immense intelligence and deep feeling, trapped inside a form that inspires only terror and disgust. His story, thus far, has been one of silent observation and solitary learning. Now he is about to step out of the shadows and into the light, and the world, he fears, is about to break his heart. Rest now, in this quiet moment of anticipation, before the monster makes his plea. We are still in the hut on the Mer de Glace, listening as the creature continues his tale. His story, thus far, has been one of discovery and a dawning, painful self-awareness. He has learned what it means to be human, the capacity for love, for virtue, for knowledge, all while being irrevocably excluded from humanity by his monstrous form. His education is complete. He has read the great books. He has even read his own creator's journal, a document that confirmed his deepest fears, that he was born an object of horror and disgust. Yet, in the midst of this profound despair, one small, fragile hope remains. It is the hope he has invested in the DeLacy family. He has watched them for months from his secret hovel. He has come to love them for their gentleness, their kindness, their noble endurance of their own suffering. He believes that their virtue is so profound that it might be the one force on earth capable of seeing past his hideous exterior to the sentient, feeling being within. He has decided to stake his entire future, his very soul, on a single, desperate gamble. He will reveal himself to them. He spends days planning his approach with meticulous care. He knows that his appearance is his greatest obstacle. He cannot simply walk up to their door. The shock would be too great. He devises a plan that relies on a single crucial fact. The old man, De Lacy, is blind. The creature's plan is this. He will wait until a time when the old man is alone in the cottage. The young people, Felix, Agatha, and Safi, often go for walks together. He will seize this opportunity to approach the patriarch of the family. The old man, unable to see his monstrous form, will only hear his voice. The creature has mastered their language. His speech is eloquent and persuasive. He will appeal to the old man's benevolence and wisdom. He will tell his story, the story of a wretched but well-meaning outcast, and he will win the old man's sympathy. Then, when the young people return, the old man, already won over, will act as his advocate. He will plead the creature's case. He will calm their fears, and he will persuade them to accept him. It is a desperate plan, but it is the only one he has. His heart is a tumult of hope and fear. He feels that this single encounter will decide his fate forever. If they accept him, he will have found his paradise. He will devote his life to serving and protecting these amiable protectors. He will no longer be alone. If they reject him, however, he knows that the last flicker of goodness in his soul will be extinguished. On that event, he says, I resolved to quit the neighborhood of man and hide myself in deserts forever. But my heart sank within me as I reflected on the fate of my only hope. The day finally arrives. He watches from his hovel as Felix, Agatha, and Safi leave the cottage for their afternoon walk. The old, blind De Lacy is left alone, sitting by the fire, playing a sad, sweet melody on his guitar. The creature's moment has come. His body trembles. His heart beats so violently he can barely breathe. He summons all his courage, leaves the hovel, and knocks timidly at the cottage door. "Come in," says the gentle voice of the old man. The creature steps inside. He stands in the center of the room that he has observed for so long, the room that has been the entire world of his education. He is overcome with emotion and cannot speak. The old man, hearing someone enter, asks who is there. "Pardon my intrusion," the creature finally manages to say, his voice thick with feeling. "I am a traveler in need of rest. You would greatly oblige me if you would allow me to remain a few minutes before the fire." De Lacy, with the simple hospitality of his nature, welcomes the stranger. "Enter," he says, "and I will try to relieve your wants, but unfortunately, my children are from home, and as I am blind, I am afraid I shall find it difficult to procure food for you." The creature reassures him that he needs only warmth and rest. He sits, and a tense silence falls. He knows he must speak, but he does not know how to begin. The old man, ever benevolent, tries to put his guest at ease. He speaks of his own sorrows, of the injustice that has befallen his family. The creature, emboldened by the old man's kindness, sees his opening. "I am an unfortunate and deserted creature," he begins. "I look around and I have no relation or friend on earth. These amiable people to whom I go, I must not be known until I am sure of their sympathy." He is telling his own story, but framing it as the story of a friend he is pleading for. He explains that he is an outcast, shunned by all, but that he has found a family of good people whom he loves from afar, and he is terrified of their rejection. The old man listens with deep sympathy. "If you are sincerely benevolent," he tells the creature, "rely on the gratitude of your friends. But if you are so destitute, why not seek the protection of these friends you speak of?" The creature explains his fear. He is judged harshly because of a prejudice against him. "Where they ought to see a feeling and kind friend," he says, "they behold only a detestable monster." "That is indeed unfortunate," De Lacy replies, his voice full of compassion. "But if these friends are good and amiable, do not despair. The hearts of men, when unprejudiced by any obvious self-interest, are full of brotherly love and charity. Rely, therefore, on your hopes." The conversation is going exactly as the creature had dreamed. The old man is compassionate, understanding, and wise. The creature's hope soars. He feels he is on the verge of salvation. He can no longer contain himself. He must reveal the truth. He grasps the old man's hand. "Now is the time," he cries out. "Save and protect me. You and your family are the friends whom I seek. Do not desert me in the hour of trial." "Great God!" exclaims the blind man. "Who are you?" At that precise climactic moment, the cottage door opens. Felix, Agatha, and Safi have returned. The scene that unfolds is one of instant, catastrophic horror. Safi, the first to enter, sees the grotesque figure of the creature holding her beloved de Lacy's hand. She shrieks and runs from the cottage. Agatha, seeing her brother's face contort in terror, faints. Felix, with a cry of rage, rushes forward. He does not see a supplicant. He sees a monster assaulting his blind father. He grabs a heavy stick and, with all his strength, strikes the creature, tearing him away from the old man. The creature does not retaliate. He is possessed by a rage of anger and despair, but his love for these people is still stronger than his rage. He could tear Felix limb from limb, but he does not. He simply stands there, absorbing the blows, his heart utterly and completely broken. The paradise he had dreamed of has become a hell of violence and rejection in the space of a single second. With a cry of indescribable anguish, he turns and flees the cottage, escaping back to the familiar darkness of his hovel. The world has ended. His last hope has been extinguished. The goodness of the de Lacys was not enough. Their fear was stronger than their virtue, and if these superior beings could not see past his form, then no one ever would. He is, and always will be, alone and hated. He spends the night in his hovel in a state of numb, agonized despair. He listens to the sounds from the cottage. He hears Felix talking with a stranger, a farmer who is arranging for the family to leave the cottage. They are too terrified to spend another night there. By the next day, they are gone. The cottage is empty. The silence is absolute. The creature's grief now curdles into a consuming black rage. The love he felt for the de Lacys transforms into a burning hatred for all of mankind. "I had been the author of unalterable evils," he reflects, "and I lived in daily fear lest the monster whom I had created should perpetrate some new wickedness. But now, he feels that the wickedness is not his own choice. It has been forced upon him by a cruel and unjust world. From that moment," he declares, "I declared everlasting war against the species, and more than all, against him who had formed me and sent me forth to this insupportable misery." His first act as a self-declared demon is one of pure, destructive fury. That night, under the light of the moon, he returns to the now empty cottage, the scene of his salvation and his damnation. He gathers wood and piles it against the walls. With a torch, he sets the cottage, the garden, and all the surrounding trees ablaze. He watches as the flames consume the place that had been his school, his church, his only home. He dances around the fire, laughing like a madman, his heart filled with a triumphant, hellish joy. The paradise has been lost, and he has scorched the earth where it once stood. With the smoke of the cottage still rising behind him, he sets out on a new quest. He has one goal, one purpose now. He will find his creator. He knows from Victor's journal that his creator is from Geneva. He does not know where Geneva is, but he has a compass and a general sense of direction. He will walk until he finds the man who gave him life, only to abandon him to this torment. He wants justice. He wants revenge. His journey is long and arduous. He travels by night, hiding from the sight of men during the day. The world, which he had once observed with a sense of wonder, is now just an obstacle to be overcome. He is driven by a cold, hard hatred. The memory of his rejection by the de Lacys is a constant, burning fire in his heart. One incident on his journey is particularly formative. It is a moment that seals his transformation into a fiend. One day, while hiding in a forest, he sees a young girl playing near a fast-flowing river. The girl slips and falls into the current. The creature, in a final lingering flicker of his former benevolence, does not hesitate. He rushes into the water and saves the drowning girl, pulling her to shore. He is in the process of trying to revive her when a man, presumably her father, appears. The man sees the creature leaning over the girl. He does not see a rescuer. He sees a monster about to harm a child. He snatches the girl away, runs into the forest, and then, from a distance, he raises a gun and shoots the creature. The bullet tears through the creature's shoulder. The pain is excruciating, but it is nothing compared to the pain of this final, absolute injustice. He had saved a life, and his reward was a gunshot. "This was then the reward of my benevolence," he cries out. "I had saved a human being from destruction, and as a recompense I now writhed under the miserable pain of a wound which shattered the flesh and bone." The feelings of kindness and gentleness which I had entertained but a few moments before gave place to hellish rage and gnashing of teeth. Inflamed by pain, I vowed eternal hatred and vengeance to all mankind. This is the last nail in the coffin of his goodness. From this point forward, he embraces his role as a demon. He continues his journey, his heart now a cold, hard knot of malice. Finally, after months of travel, he arrives in the vicinity of Geneva. He is hiding in the woods near Plainpalais when fate delivers his creator's family directly into his path. He sees a beautiful small boy playing alone. An idea, diabolical and swift, enters his mind. I could seize him, he thinks, and educate him as my companion and friend, and he would not have the same prejudices against my deformity. He imagines that a child, too young to have learned the world's prejudices, might be able to love him. He grabs the boy. The child, terrified, begins to scream, calling him an ogre, a monster. The boy struggles, and in his terror he hurls an insult that seals his own doom. "Let me go," the boy cries. "My papa is a syndic. He is Monsieur Frankenstein. He will punish you." The name, Frankenstein, strikes the creature like a bolt of lightning. This is not just any child. This is the kin of his accursed creator. The last vestiges of his plan to find a friend vanish, replaced by a surge of pure, vengeful fury. "Frankenstein, you belong then to my enemy. You shall be my first victim." He wraps his massive hands around the boy's small throat, and in a moment of triumphant rage, he silences him forever. As he looks down at the lifeless body of William Frankenstein, he feels a hellish triumph. He has struck his first blow against his creator. He has made Victor feel a fraction of the misery that he himself has felt. He notices the locket around the boy's neck. He takes it, not for its value, but as a trophy, a memento of his first act of vengeance. He wanders away from the scene and takes refuge in a nearby barn. There, he finds a young woman sleeping on the straw. It is Justine Moritz. He looks at her. She is beautiful, and for a moment he is moved by her beauty, but his heart is now too hard for such feelings. He gazes at the portrait in the locket, the picture of the beautiful Caroline Frankenstein. The contrast between this image of beloved, protected womanhood and his own wretched, abhorred existence fills him with rage. "I, too, can create desolation," he thinks. "My enemy is not invulnerable. This death will carry despair to him, and 1,000 other miseries shall torment and destroy him." With a flash of cunning malice, he decides to frame the sleeping girl. He places the locket in the pocket of her dress. It is a random, thoughtless act of pure evil, an impulse to spread the misery, to make the innocent suffer as he has suffered. He then flees, his dark work complete. And so the creature concludes his tale. He has laid his entire life bare before his creator. He has explained his transformation from a benevolent, lonely being into a vengeful fiend. He has shown Victor how every step of his journey towards evil was paved by human cruelty and, above all, by Victor's own act of abandonment. "That is my history," he says, his voice low and grim. "I am malicious because I am miserable. Am I not shunned and hated by all mankind? You, my creator, would tear me to pieces and triumph. Remember that, and tell me why I should pity man more than he pities me." He has made his case, and now he makes his demand. It is the one thing, he believes, that can redeem him, the one thing that can end his war against humanity. "I am alone and miserable," he says. "I demand a creature of another sex, but as hideous as myself. It is your duty as my creator to render me happy. You must create a female for me with whom I can live in the interchange of those sympathies necessary for my being." He promises that if Victor grants him this one request, He and his mate will flee to the vast, uninhabited wilds of South America. They will disappear from the world of men forever. Victor will never see them again. His reign of terror will be over. But if Victor refuses, he makes a chilling vow. He will continue his work of destruction. He will pursue Victor to the ends of the earth, and he will glut his maw with the blood of Victor's remaining friends and family. "I shall be with you on your wedding night," he warns. The words a cold, venomous promise. The creature has finished. His plea, his demand, and his threat hang in the air of the small, cold hut. He awaits the verdict of his creator. We will end our section here, with Victor Frankenstein staring into the face of his monster, forced to confront the consequence of his creation and to make a decision upon which the fate of everyone he loves now depends. Rest now, in this moment of terrible, profound suspense. We are seated in a hut of cold stone and rough-hewn wood, high on a desolate sea of ice. The fire sputters in the hearth. The creature has finished speaking. His story, a wrenching epic of solitude, discovery, and brutal rejection, has been laid bare. And now his demand hangs in the air, heavy and cold as the mountain peaks outside. He has asked for a companion, a female as monstrous as himself, to be his partner in a self-imposed, lifelong exile. He has made his case with a logic born of profound misery, and he has issued his threat, a chilling promise of unending vengeance should his creator refuse. The narrative voice is no longer the creature's, it is Victor's once more. We are returned to the confines of his memory, listening as he recounts this pivotal moment to Captain Walton on that icebound ship at the top of the world. He looks back now from the end of his journey to the moment that determined its terrible course. And as he speaks, we can feel the crushing weight of the decision he was forced to make. For a long time after the creature finished speaking, Victor sat in silence. The hut was filled only with the sound of the crackling fire and the low moan of the wind. His mind was a battlefield. His first instinctual reaction was one of absolute visceral revulsion. Create another such fiend, potentially more malevolent than the first. A being whose existence would double the horror, a partner to join in a dance of destruction across the globe. The very thought was an abomination. "I do refuse it," he says, his voice a low, trembling growl of defiance. "I will not create another like yourself, equal in deformity and wickedness." The creature's hideous features contort, not in rage, but in a kind of grim, sorrowful determination. He does not resort to threats immediately. Instead, he argues, his eloquence a terrible and persuasive weapon. He appeals not to Victor's compassion, for he knows there is none, but to his sense of justice and his reason. "You are in the wrong," the creature insists, his deep voice calm and steady. "And instead of threatening, I am content to reason with you. I am malicious because I am miserable. Are you not my creator? It is in your power to recompense me, to send me from this world of men, a world that hates me, and to give me a companion who will not. We shall be monsters, cut off from all the world, but on that account we shall be more attached to one another. Our lives will not be happy, but they will be harmless and free from the misery I now feel." He paints a picture for Victor, a vision of a solitary, pastoral existence in the vast, remote jungles of South America. He and his mate would live on acorns and berries, their dwelling a simple cave. They would have no contact with humanity. They would be a forgotten myth, a footnote in the history of creation. "The picture I present to you is peaceful and human," he argues, "and you must feel that you could deny it only in the wantonness of power and cruelty." Victor listens, and despite his loathing, the creature's words begin to find purchase in his mind. He feels the undeniable logic of the argument. He, Victor, was the one who had initiated this chain of events. He had created a sentient being, capable of love and reason, and then abandoned it to a world that could only ever respond with fear and hatred. Was it not his duty to mitigate the suffering he had caused? The creature's misery was a direct result of his solitude. If that solitude were remedied, perhaps its malevolence would indeed cease. He weighs the options. On the one hand, the horror of the act itself, to once again assemble a being from the materials of the charnel house, to engage in that filthy work, to risk creating a second, perhaps even more dangerous, fiend. On the other hand, the creature's promise of peace. If he were to comply, the reign of terror would end. His family, His father, Elizabeth, Ernest, would be safe. The world would be safe. He would be free. It was a dreadful bargain, a pact with a demon, but it was a bargain that promised a future free from the constant, gnawing fear that now consumed him. But his hatred is still strong. He looks at the monster, at the murderer of his innocent brother, at the architect of Justine's doom, and his heart hardens again. "You swear," he says, his voice laced with suspicion, "to be harmless, but have you not already shown a degree of malice that should reasonably make me distrust you?" The creature's reply is swift and logical. "How is that?" he asks. "I have murdered no one, and I have committed no crime, except for the theft of a few berries, until driven to desperation by your cruelty. My vices are the children of a forced solitude that I abhor, and my virtues will necessarily arise when I live in communion with an equal. I shall feel the affections of a sensitive being and become linked to the chain of existence and events from which I am now excluded." The argument is almost unassailable. The creature is, in essence, putting Victor on trial, forcing him to acknowledge his own culpability. The more Victor listens, the more he feels the terrible weight of his own responsibility. He had been the first aggressor. His neglect had been the first crime. The final deciding factor is the creature's power. Victor looks upon its massive frame, its superhuman strength and agility. He remembers how it had bounded over the glaciers with a speed no man could match. He knows with an absolute certainty that if he refuses, the creature will make good on its threat. The promise to be with him on his wedding night echoes in his mind, a chilling premonition of a horror yet to come. The safety of Elizabeth, of his father, hangs in the balance. He realizes that he has no real choice. His will is pitted against a force far stronger than himself, a force he himself had created. After a long, agonizing silence, Victor finally capitulates. The words are forced from him, each one a bitter pill of defeat. "I consent to your demand," he says, his voice barely a whisper. "I will create a female companion for you on your solemn oath to quit Europe forever and every other place in the neighborhood of man as soon as I deliver her to you." A flicker of triumphant joy passes over the creature's hideous features. He eagerly takes the oath, swearing by the sun, by the sky, by the love he hopes to feel, that he will fulfill his side of the bargain. He tells Victor that he will monitor his progress, that he will be his unseen shadow, and that when the work is complete, he will appear to claim his bride. With that, the creature turns and leaves the hut. Victor watches as his monstrous form disappears into the mist and ice of the glacier, descending back into the valley. He is alone once more. Alone with the terrible promise he has just made. The journey back down the mountain is a slow, joyless descent. The sublime beauty of the Alps, which had briefly soothed his spirit on the way up, now seems oppressive and alien. The pact he has made has severed his connection to the natural world. He feels like a man who has sold his soul. The task before him is a nightmare. He must return to the unhallowed work, to the filthy creation that had so nearly destroyed his mind and body. The thought fills him with a revulsion so profound that his entire body trembles. He returns to Chamonix, and from there, he begins the slow journey back to Geneva. He travels in a stupor of dread and self-loathing. He tries to rationalize his decision. He tells himself he is doing it for the sake of his family, for the sake of humanity. He is a martyr, sacrificing his own peace of mind for the greater good. But these justifications ring hollow. He knows that he is acting out of fear, that he is a slave to the monster he has created. When he arrives back in Geneva, his family is relieved to see him looking somewhat healthier. The mountain air, they believe, has done him good. They cannot see the new, dark cloud that has settled over his spirit. He tries to resume a normal life, but it is a hollow performance. He is physically present with his family, but his mind is elsewhere, consumed by the dreadful task that awaits him. He is living a life of profound duplicity, his outward calm a fragile mask for his inner torment. There is one further complication. When Henry Clerval learns of Victor's plan to travel to England, he is overjoyed. Henry's own father has finally relented and allowed his son to pursue a more liberal career path. Henry has long dreamed of visiting India, and a stop in London to deal with the East India Company is a necessary part of his plan. He proposes that he and Victor travel to England together. Victor is thrown into a new state of conflict. The thought of travelling with his cheerful, kind-hearted friend is both a comfort and a terror. Clerval's company would be a balm to his tormented spirit, a link to the world of light and normalcy. But how can he conduct his secret, monstrous work with his friend by his side? He fears discovery. He fears for Clerval's safety should the creature decide that Victor is not working quickly enough. But the thought of a long, solitary journey, alone with his dark thoughts and the unseen presence of his monstrous shadow, is even more terrifying. He convinces himself that Clerval's presence might be a form of protection. "I felt the greatest ardor for virtue rise within me," he says, "when I thought of Clerval." His friend's goodness, he hopes, might serve as a shield against his own inner darkness and the external threat of the fiend. He agrees that they will travel together. The preparations are made. The letters of introduction are procured. The date of their departure is set for late September. Victor says his goodbyes to his family. The parting from Elizabeth is particularly painful. She is sad and full of a vague, uneasy foreboding, but she tries to be cheerful for his sake. Victor looks at her, at his father, at his remaining brother, and a terrible thought crosses his mind. Is this the last time he will see them all alive? Is he leaving them only to have his monster destroy them in his absence? The fear is a cold knot in his stomach, but he must go. He is bound by his dreadful bargain. And so, our section ends. Victor and Henry Clerval are leaving Geneva. They are setting out on a journey that, for Clerval, is an exciting adventure, the first step towards a brilliant future. For Victor, it is a grim pilgrimage, a journey into a self-imposed exile where he must perform a task that fills him with horror and disgust. He is a man living a double life, a man bound by a secret pact, shadowed by a monster, and driven by a desperate hope that this one last, terrible act of creation will finally buy him peace. We leave him on the road, with his best friend by his side, heading towards the shores of England and towards the lonely, remote place where he will attempt to build a bride for a demon. Rest now, as the journey into this new darkness begins. The journey to England begins, but we have travelled far enough for one night. The story will pause here, waiting patiently on the road. There are no more words to hear. There are no more scenes to picture. The thoughts of Victor, the hopes of Clerval can all be left behind. Let the story rest. Let your mind rest. Let your body rest. The rest is silence and sleep. Rest now.